Bethro. Not anymore. Circe spat, that betrothal is at an end. The Martells betrayed us. Allied with our enemies, which any idiot except my brother could have predicted is exactly what their family would do in a war. They hate us mercilessly. You cannot marry Doran's spawn. Especially not for the sake of a throne that is rightfully yours. But, for what it is worth, I agree with your mother, my child, the High Septon said solemnly. The Iron Throne is yours and, if you will permit me, I will see you rightfully restored to it. How? Circe's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What ability do you have to make good on that promise? I have the power of the gods behind me, the High Septon responded stoically, as well as the power of the newly reconstituted Faith Militant. The what? Circe froze as she remembered. The Faith Militant had been the military arm of the Faith in a bygone era. The reforms of Gehares had rendered the order obsolete. Who? Mercilla asked, confused once again by the adults talking over her. The swords and stars, my child, the High Septon intoned, warmth in his tone. They are the strong arm of the seven and, if the gods will it, they will deliver this realm from sin. The gods would do well to strike this one down so that we'd all be spared from his madness. How can you have brought back the Faith Militant? Circe inquired, making no attempt to hide her skepticism. The law prevents. Laws can be changed if necessary, the old man reasoned calmly, or set aside in the event that they prevent evil from being fought. What is this fool going on about? You've not changed the law, Circe realized, you're just ignoring it. Indeed, your grace, the fires of fanaticism seemed to set alight the old man's eyes. After all, what is man's law next to those set down by the gods? The seven-pointed star tells us to fight evil and to help the helpless. If the crown will not do that, then the faith will. The audacity was breathtaking. You have no intention of supporting the Targaryens. Neither them, the High Septon intoned, nor the northern barbarians with their foul tree gods. And certainly not Stannis and his horrific foreign deity that requires human sacrifice. No, this will be a pure realm of believers who follow the true faith. But you have no army, Circe began. Ah, but we do, the other replied, almost crowing in victory. I have gathered together several hundred souls within the city and spread the word across the seven kingdoms that those that follow the true faith should be prepared to answer the call. He turned to look at Mercilla. All the common folk need is a sign that we can win and a figurehead to follow. You would have Mercilla be that figurehead? Circe was astounded by the man's ambition. Of course. Our world is made up of the two twin pillars of the faith and the crown. What is one without the other? He turned his hungry eyes on Circe's daughter. I will give you the crown of your father. All you have to do is stay here with us and publicly support our cause. Madness, utter madness. The Targaryens must know what you're up to, Circe reasoned quickly. She saw that Mercilla had become frightened by the old man's zeal. Much as I hate the spider as a liar and betrayer, the fact remains he is most effective at his job. So what if he is? The man shrugged. The dragons cannot stop us all. Circe shook her head, trying to ward off the man's insanity. You said you have a few hundred here. I hear the Targaryens have thousands of soldiers just outside the city walls. I said I had hundreds of followers in the Faith Militant. That does not take into account the many thousands that make up the city's populace. Nor does it allow for the hundreds of thousands of small folk across the realm. No matter how many soldiers the Highborn bring, we will still outnumber them. We are the many, they are the few. He looked triumphantly at them, and when the many start fearing the few. Circe took a step back. She instinctively drew Mercilla behind her to shield her from the madman she saw before her. The High Septon took a step towards them before a voice interrupted them. Your Holiness. The High Septon turned. What is it, Septa-Yenet? The young woman, looking graceful in her septa robes, bowed her head deferentially. I beg forgiveness for interrupting your discussion, Your Holiness, but a visitor to our September has asked for permission to enter the library. Since your High Holiness has barred entry to all but those you approve. The man in question has asked for my permission directly. The man arched an eyebrow. This is not the best time for such a discussion. Still, have him come to me and he may make his case for entry. As you wish, Your Holiness. The woman moved off, almost gliding across the floor. Circe spied the High Septon as he smiled benevolently at the departing girl. Filthy little pederast. If you will excuse me, Your Grace. The man said, "It would be best if I dealt with this matter before we conclude our conversation." Circea was about to respond when the soft echoing of wood striking stone interrupted them. The soft clicking was accompanied by sound of heavy boots and the rustle of armor. The sound of movement was amplified by the large stone and marble hall. The former queen turned to watch as a cripple limped his way across the hall. His cane echoed sharply as it struck the floor. She was about to look away when she saw the two hulking warriors that escorted the man as he made their way to the dais. They were partly obscured by the long shadows cast by the statues and high walls, but they strode behind the stooped beggar. Behind them, trailing in the wake of the much broader figures, was a young black-faced boy, clad in the robes of a citadel novice. No, the cripple is not a beggar. This one is highborn, his clothes are finely made, a combination of silk and velvet. Circea could also see that the man was young, much younger than his halting steps would have her believe. "Who is this man?" The figure came to the foot of the dais and offered a slight bow to the High Septon. "Your Holiness," he said in a rich voice, "I am Willers of House Tyrell. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "The Tyrells? Here is in King's Landing. Gods, is there no end to the list of traitors and would-be usurpers?" The High Septon nodded in reply. "You are welcome here, Lord Tyrell, as are all true believers." He looked behind the other man. "I see you have brought with you some other people." Willers gave a soft smile. "Yes indeed, I have the honor of being escorted by the Lady Brian, Lord Commander of King Rob's Wolf's Guard, and her associate, Sander Clegane." Circea's head jerked up. Of course, how could I not identify the treacherous monster? Those scars should have stood out for leagues. Cursing her distraction, she took in the other arrivals. Next to Sander, still as gruesome as ever, stood a tall, muscular lady clad in finely made armor with castle-forged steel strapped to her waist. Gods, it's a wonder Robb Stark could beat anyone if he's had lumbering sows like that in his ranks. "Lord Commander." Circea scoffed in disdain. "I had looked for you at the funeral, my lord," the High Septon remarked, his face cold. "Your sister was invited to attend." Disapproval at Margaery Tyrell's absence was evident in his tone. "I regret that the Queen had to decline such a welcome invitation," Willers Tyrell replied with an easy smile. "Having so recently given birth to a healthy baby, Her Grace is currently on bed rest until she is well again." "Ah, so the Tyrell bitch has given birth to the wolf mongrel. How happy for her. Shame it didn't breach and die and take the little whore along with it. It would do for the Starks to see some of the pain they've inflicted on others being revisited on them." "Your sister is to be congratulated," the High Septon remarked, "as is her husband." "I shall pass along your well wishes," Willers said, "especially to the king." "Westeros has no king," the holy man declared, "only a queen, who stands behind me." Our Willers Tyrell did not miss a step. He nodded in greeting to Myrcella as he offered her a sad look. "My condolences for the loss of your brother, my lady." "I thank you, Sir," Myrcella said politely. "Not at all," the man replied, "all courtesy. I would have been here to pay my respects, but I was delayed in meetings with the new Master of Coin. Magister Illyrio is a very tough negotiator. I do not envy the people that have to endure his conversational tactics on a regular basis." The son of Mace Tyrell leaned on his cane. "In any case, I apologize for the interruption. I was merely asking the Septons whether I could have access to the small library kept here in the September. Before I open our library, I would know the reason for you looking through our sacred texts." "I have no interest in the sacred scrolls, Your Holiness," Willers assured him soothingly. "I merely wanted to have young Alras here." At this he indicated the young man behind him who bowed in greeting. "I would like him to look at the historical scripts you have. As you may know, I have an interest in historical matters." "I can attest to that." A man's voice interrupted them. The group turned to the other side of the dais to see another group approaching. A group comprised of Prince Oberyn and two young women. All were wearing the bronze leather armor of Dawn. The man's letters are full of ramblings about historical issues. The Red Viper looked over Willers as he leaned over his cane. "How are you, you old cripple?" Willers adjusted his weight onto his cane. He tilted his head before responding in a dry tone. "I'm well, thank you, Prince Oberyn. I wonder, do you still suffer from that toothache that so troubled you in the past?" "Toothache?" The warrior looked puzzled. "From all the pillow biting you're prone to." There was a momentary stunned silence. Behind Willers, the lady called Brian's hand had gone to the hilt of her sword. Opposite her, the two companions of Oberyn had both gone for their own weapons. Cersei glanced at the High Septon, but he showed no inclination to intervene. Must fill his cock with blood to see two potential enemies fight. The silence played out for a few moments. Finally, Oberyn Martell threw his head and roared with laughter. He stepped forward and slapped Willers Tyrell hard on the back. "Well struck, my old friend. Well struck." He offered the other man his hand. "I should have known better than to bandy words with you." Mace Tyrell's son smiled warmly as he took the Red Viper's hand in greeting. They embraced in front of everyone while the four escorts exchanged glances in confusion. The High Septon looked. "Apologies to you all," Willers Tyrell said, after he had pulled back from Oberyn. "I know the prince of old." He waved Lady Brian back as he lifted his cane. "It was a tourney with the Red Viper here that gave me my limp and causes me to be dependent on this." "That is unfair, my lord," Oberyn admonished with a glint in his eye. "The horse fell on you. It was a tragic accident, I grant you, but these things happen." "They happen quite a lot with you, my prince," Willers noted slyly. "Lord Euronwood would attest to that were he still alive." Oberyn chuckled dryly. "Enough. I yield to your wordplay, my lord. Tell me, what brings you to this shit-stained city and away from your work at Highgarden?" "My sister has just given birth," Willers informed him, "a little boy called Ricard." "The Dornish people congratulate your sister," Oberyn said with another encouraging slap on the back. "Even when born to a rival, the birth of a child is a wondrous thing." "Agreed. I must send a gift." Oberyn looked behind him. "NYM, remind me to send something when we get back to camp." The leaner, more feminine figure behind Oberyn nodded firmly. "Yes, father." Cersei blinked. "This barbarian is protected by his own daughter. What is this, girls playing at war?" She looked past the Tyrell lord. "Very similar to that beast of a woman protecting the cripple." "But why are you here?" Oberyn asked Willers again. "I had hoped that we may cross paths at the treaty signing, so this is an unexpected honor." "Quite," Willers said smiling. "It is my ardent hope that we can unite our sides by marriage and unify the realm." Cersei's eyes blazed in anger. "So, the dragons and the wolves think they can conquer the realm without war? Brush House Lannister aside like wheat in a storm. Never. Why then, if not for treaty business, are you here?" "We were just discussing that before your arrival, Prince Oberyn." The High Septon interceded, clearly unhappy that he was no longer leading the conversation. Indeed, Willers Tyrell turned to address the man on the dais. "My apologies, Your High Holiness, for the digression. As I say, I have an academic interest in the histories of the Seven Kingdoms. I have already hounded the Citadel in Old Town. In fact, that's where I met young Alras here, and I would be most grateful if you could open your own library." The High Septon looked quizzically at the man, seemingly waiting his decision. "Very well." He looked into the shadows of the room as he raised his voice. "Septa Yennet will allow you access." "Ah, the young girl I spoke to earlier." The old man's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Yes, what of it?" Cersei suppressed a smirk. "The old goat is jealous that someone else might have designs on his young one." "Disgusting, just like all men." Willers nodded as if in understanding. "I thank you, Your Holiness. It will aid me greatly in my studies. It is so important that we understand who we are." He glanced at Oberyn Martell and where we come from. With another bow the man walked away. His small party departed, following the directions of Septa Yennet, who escorted them out. "What was that about?" Cersei fumed. She hated feeling that others had more information than others. The Red Viper turned to Myrcella and gave her a quizzical look. "We are almost done here, Prince Oberyn." The High Septon promised. "Please allow us a minute or two to discuss the final details of King Tommen's burial." The warriors gave a mocking glance at the holy man, but Cersei saw his eyes tighten at the mention that her son had been a king. He looked again at Myrcella and, only after the girl gave a slight smile, did he nod and step away from the dais. His two escorts went with him. Now the man turned his eyes back on Myrcella. "What say you to my offer, Your Grace?" "What exactly are you offering?" Cersei asked. She had no intention of agreeing with this little fool, but she had nothing to lose by appearing interested. Especially with it being clear that the two factions opposing her family may well be on the verge of uniting. "I am offering Her Grace the crown," the High Septon said calmly, though not looking at Cersei herself. The man only had eyes for Myrcella. All she has to do is support our cause and stay here with us. Myrcella looked up, fear making her eyes widen. Yes, stay. Of course, the High Septon said, smiling warmly. If you accept my offer, we will be able to offer you sanctuary within the Great September. Circe paused, her mind racing. If she was here, then at least she's be close by and out of the clutches of our enemies. She turned to voice her support, but Myrcella took a step back. No. The High Septon looked surprised, but, after he gave a concerned look towards the Dornish party, he stepped in closer. Your Grace, High Holiness. The old man looked down as yet another visitor approached the dais. This one wearing inlaid silver armor over a hair shirt. The man had a serious face, as if he took himself, and his duties far too seriously. Yes, Sir Theodan, he asked wearily. Your Holiness, the somber knight declared, a short while ago a number of small folk have been spotted entering the catacombs beneath the September. The old man rounded on him, all signs of fatigue gone in an instant. How many? A small number, Your Grace. 3 or 4 at the most. However, one of the guards thought they may be armed. The old man considered, then they pose little direct threat to us. Probably beggars looking for shelter. Nevertheless, have the guards search the catacombs. I want them found. They will be, Your Holiness. Sir Theodan straightened to attention. Men have already been sent. I just thought it prudent that you be alerted. Quite right. Keep me informed. The knight saluted and then walked briskly back the way he had come. Sighing in irritation, the High Septon turned to address them again. Forgive the constant interruptions, Your Grace. I would like to return to our conversation. Myrcella looked like a deer about to be hit by a hunter's arrow. I don't want to be queen. It is your duty, the High Septon remarked softly. You are the child of Robert Baratheon. With your brothers no longer with us, the crown falls to you. Ha! That lumbering oath was passed out drunk the night he thought we had made Myrcella. All it took was the work of a few minutes to make him spill his seed on the bedding, and, when he woke, he thought he'd had a great night of passion. What he would have done had he known I'd spent the night with Jaime, that the groans the servants had heard were those of my brother rather than my husband. I don't want it. Myrcella whispered gently. Consider this, the man before her said, adopting a gentle tone. You are the only true-born descendant of King Robert left to us. It is your right. I have no wish to have the throne. Cersei's daughter persisted. I want to marry Tristan and live in the water gardens of Dorne. You must put away such childish fancies. Any pretense at gentile behavior vanishing in the face of Myrcella's stubbornness. He moved closer, looming over the young girl. It is your duty. It is nor for you to tell my daughter her duty. Cersei said, stepping between the Septon and her daughter. You have no right to tell her. I have every right. The man replied, his eyes hooded, his tone hostile. Once more he looked at Myrcella. Think on this, girl. Your family is gone, your support vanished. If you wish to be safe, you must join with the faith. She must do. Be silent, woman. The High Septon thundered, threateningly, one more word and you shall be returned to your cell. He turned on Cersei's daughter. Oh yes, Your Grace, your mother is being held on charges of adultery and treason. Charges that could well see her being executed. The only way to prevent that is for you and I to come to an agreement. He dares to threaten her with the loss of one of the few family members she has left. Myrcella had started to cry. Tears rolled down her perfect cheeks. Cersei pulled her close into an embrace. She wanted to fight back, to tell the High Septon to forget his offer, but she could think of nothing to say. They were in his world now and they had no friends to speak of. Hush, child. The High Septon said in a tone that tried to convey warmth but instead was brittle and fake. One word from you is all that it would take to end this. When you accept the word of the faith, you never have to be alone again. She is not alone now. The 3 people on the dais whirled to be confronted with Oberyn Martell as he climbed the steps to the dais. The Red Viper's face was cold, impassive, as he climbed the stone steps towards them. Are you all right, princess? She is fine. The High Septon interrupted angrily. We were just. I did not ask you, old man. Oberyn cut in harshly. I was speaking to the young woman that you, unaccountably, have reduced to tears. She is distraught about her brother. The other man retorted. No doubt Oberyn looked carefully from the High Septon to Cersea's child. And I'm sure she thanks you for your concern. He paused, however, I believe it is now time to leave. Myrcella let out a sob as she clung to Cersea's waist. What about mother? She can come too, Prince Oberyn said, smiling slightly at Cersei. She will be very welcome in the camp. No doubt my brother Doran would love to speak to her. Put myself at the arms of the Martells, the sworn enemies of my house. Cersei glanced at the old man nearby. Still, it can't be worse than being held in a cell here, at the mercy of these ridiculous zealots. It would be an honor to meet Prince Doran. Unacceptable, the High Septon burst out, as he gave her an angry look. Cersei Lannister has been placed into the custody of the faith. Your own queen ordered it. I shall talk with her, Oberyn said softly, but, for the meantime, I believe the Lannister ladies should come with me. No, the High Septon ordered as he quickly clapped his hands in what was clearly a signal. Lady Cersei stays here, as does her daughter. From the shadows of the September a large number of Sodders stepped out into the beams of light being sent through the high windows. They formed a loose circle around the dais. Some were knights in the colors of the faith militant. Others were merely sparrows with cudgels of wood and metal. Prince Oberyn glanced from side to side, taking in the number. Cersei counted at least 20 men. He's outnumbered by a significant margin. Idly, Oberyn brought his hands to rest on the pommels of the daggers still sheathed at his waist. No quarrel with you, sirs, but if you don't let the ladies leave you'll never see another dawn. We welcome death. The hereafter poses no threat to the faithful. Then by all means, Oberyn Martell said wryly, a smile crept across his face, test my resolve. I believe that Prince Oberyn is overwrought, the High Septon said imperiously to his waiting men, perhaps a night spent in a penitent cell will do him good. It would give him time to consider his offenses against the faith. The circle began to shrink as the man advanced in towards the dais. All of them looked focused on combat, though Cersei could detect the fanatical gleam in their eye. There are too many, he doesn't have a chance. Girls. At Oberyn's command 3 figures sprinted towards the group from the doorway at the entrance to the September. 3 streaks that darted through the room and attacked one side of the small circle. Men fell back as they were set upon by 3 small warriors who slashed at them with a spear, sword and even a whip. Cersei blinked. It looked as if one of the attackers was the young novice who had been with Willers Tyrell earlier. The black-faced figure spun and slashed at the sparrows, slashing the throat of one while stabbing a second in the groin. Oberyn Martell used the distraction to his best advantage. He seemed to withdraw into himself before surging forward and stabbing one enemy in the chest while ducking under the wild swing of one of the faith militant. In the time it took Cersei to blink 2 more men lay dead or dying on the floor. Cersei threw an arm across Myrcella's chest and pushed her back, away from the dais as the room erupted in fighting. Everywhere she looked, once of the infamous Sand Snakes, along with the Red Viper himself, were engaged with 2 or more opponents. And they were more than a match for any of them. Men fell left and right as the young women took them apart with well-timed thrusts and parries. The Dornish were never still but spun and darted left and right, sometimes working as a team, more often working on their own. But for every flick of a blade, stab of a spear, or crack of a whip, more of the faith militant fell to the ground with mortal wounds. Guards! The High Septon's voice rang out across the hall, echoing off the high ceiling. Reinforcements belonging to the faith surged into the hall. At least another 20 men. Cersei's heart dropped. It's over. There are just too many. They'll either have to yield or be killed. It seemed that that message had not been conveyed to the Dornish. In a flash they had engaged the new enemy, spinning out of the surrounding circle the attackers had tried to establish and taking the fight to their new assailants. No commands were spoken between the warriors of Dorne. Even the novice seemed to work in tandem with the others as they cut down more and more of the faith. They took injuries, of course. The one called Nym took a blade in the thigh while the other original guard, one armed with a long spear and of considerable size, took a wound to her side. Even so they fought on, and, for every second they did, more and more of the faith fell victim to their blades. Cersei pulled Myrcella back against a pillar at the side of the room. Behind her was a window, through which the steep terrain of Visneur's Hill could be seen. She pushed her daughter behind cover. Get the women. The High Septon called from his place on the dais. His aged face was lined with fury as his men were cut down before him. Don't let them escape. Men broke off and ran towards them. Circe looked around for a weapon, something she could use to fight the bastards. You will not take my daughter from me. She need not have been concerned. Halfway towards her the Faith militant were intercepted by Oberyn Martell. The Prince of Dawn warded the men off with one of his long daggers, while stabbing out with a spear he held in his right hand. There was no zeal in the fanatic's eyes now. All Circe could make out was fear and caution as they fought a man who seemingly could not be killed. As the soldiers attacked, the Red Viper spun away and led the men on a merry dance across the hall, his knife and spear flicking out to do yet more damage to those who thought to contain him. Circe watched as the enemy numbers dwindled. The High Septon looked beside himself with frustration. Gods, they might actually win this fight. Then we can return to the Dornish camp and I can prevail upon Doran Martell for safety. The irony of asking Doran for protection would be enough to make father spin in his grave. Still, anywhere is better than here and needs must win. Her thoughts were interrupted by a large vibration that shook the September as easily as a child might shake a rattle. The floor heaved under them, spilling everyone from their feet like reeds in the wind. She hit the stone floor hard, the air forced from her lungs as she looked fearfully about her. Across the September, men were trying to regain their feet, though some stayed where they were on the ground, shooting scared glances at one another and to the top of the dais where the High Septon had been. Doubtless the old fool had been cast to the floor by the vibrations. What in the world was that? Circe got her feet under her. Myrcella tried to do likewise, but Circe restrained her with a hand. Stay down. She hissed, we don't know. A second vibration shook her away from her daughter and smashed her against the window behind them. The glass cracked from the impact. Her hand slightly cut from the jagged edges. She was about to speak, to tell Myrcella to get to safety, but a loud roar stole her breath from her. The sound came from beneath them and deafened them all. Circe placed her bleeding hands to her ears to block the sound. Then the September exploded. A world of bright green color and searing heat. She awoke a little time later. It took some moments for Circe to clear her vision. Even then she could hardly see anything. Dust and soot filled her lungs and eyes, making her choke as well as denying her the ability to see. A cough racked her chest, her body's furious attempts to clear the irritants she'd breathed in. She tried to take a breath, but the effort was in vain and she dissolved into a fit of coughing and heaves. Her first thought was to turn on her side and try and get some badly needed air. It was then she realized she was pinned under debris. Try as she might, she could not shift her body under the weight of stone that had fallen upon her. She was disorientated, bewildered. Her body would not obey any commands. Everything hurt, her face was on fire. She couldn't feel the right side of her body. Despite her best efforts, her right eye refused to open. If she focused, she could see the sky through the rubble, but that was about all. Well, at least I know I'm on my back. Gods, what happened? Circe tried again to move, but her body remained pinned. Her arms and legs were limp, useless appendages that did not assist her at all. She tried to move her head to assess her position, but pain licked through her neck and head like fire, burning into her mind like a hot blade, making her want to gasp. If gasping was an option. Circe did not know how long she lay there. She tried again and again to move, but, each time, her body betrayed her, refusing to move. Slowly a feeling of numbness pervaded her body, blocking the pain and giving her even less option to move. Not that I had much to start with. She could hear faint noises in the distance. Vainly, she tried to call for aid, but she didn't have the strength nor the air to spare for shouting. All that came out was a slight wail that barely registered in her own ears, let alone to any would-be rescuers. Anger and despair filled her. Once more she tried to call for aid. This time she was rewarded by a short cry. She sighed in relief as a figure came into view. A burnt, soot-stained man who leaned over the hole in which she lay. The man's figure blocked the light and she was unable to make out the face of her rescuer. The man, she was sure it was a man, reached down and touched her cheek before leaning back and calling for aid. As he called out, the light streamed from behind his head and she was forced to squint. "Hold on, my lady. We'll get you clear." She knew that voice, but she was unable to place it. Her mind was addled by the fall. Where am I? At the foot of Wisniew's hill the man replied as he boldly started lifting stone pieces from her body. He set them down gently to the side as he started to clear her body. You were thrown clear of the blast. Blast. Wildfire, the man answered as he finished clearing her torso. He leaned over and pressed his hands across her body. She felt nothing as he probed, though the breathing seemed to come easier to her now. What? There was a cache of it under the September, the man said, beginning to work on her legs. Someone detonated it. There's nothing left of the building, or the surrounding hill. Circe tried to get her mind to focus. Who? It matters not for the time being. All that matters is the search for survivors. My daughters were in there. Daughters? With a slight gasp she saw it, the face of her rescuer. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, his face black and bruised. Blood streaming from his ears and cut lips. Yes, the man said simply. Do you know what happened to them? No, Circe said. I couldn't see anything after the vibrations knocked me down. You and everyone else. Oberyn looked around him, appearing to fight dismay. How did you survive? Like you, I was thrown from one of the sept's windows and fell down the hill. Luckily, my fall was broken by a food cart. He looked down at his battered body. His armor was bent and ripped, his body burnt and injured. As you can see, it was not a graceful landing. Circe winced as blinding pain seized her head. One though suddenly pervaded her mind. What of Myrcella? What of my daughter? Oberyn paused, a look of empathy crossing his hard features. The expression looked odd on the warrior's haggard face. Later. No. Anger surged through her. Now. Is she all right? Another dark expression from Oberyn Martell confirmed Circe's worst fears. No. Please, no. Not my daughter. Not her. Circe closed her one good eye. Tell me. She's gone, my lady. Perhaps we can. Tell me. Circe repeated, putting as much force as she could behind the order. With a sigh Oberyn faced her. Your daughter was thrown from the window with you. Unfortunately, she was a lot closer to the force of the explosion. Not only that, she was burned quite badly. Her body came to rest quite far from here. I believe she died on impact. She did not suffer. Circe groaned in despair. Her body, she croaked. You do not wish to see it yet. Oberyn said firmly. The flames did a great deal of damage. Only her hair and the gold cloak she was wearing, the same cloak we wrapped her in, could identify her. Circe was overwhelmed with grief. Gold will be their crowns and gold will be their shrouds. Tears came from her eyes, a torrent of emotion that she made no effort to stop. Gods, it has all come true. Jaime, Joffrey, Tommen and now Myrcella, all gone. All gone ahead of me. What of me? She asked quickly. She knew the fact she could not feel her body was not a positive sign. I regret my lady's injuries are severe. How bad? The prince sighed. You're badly burnt. One eye is gone, as is most of your hair. But, more seriously, I believe my lady's back is broken. How can you tell? I studied as a maester at the citadel, Oberyn said grimly, and I have been a warrior since the day I could heft a spear. I know a thing or two about injuries. Gods. Circe let forth a guttural cry of pain and misery. The gods have taken everything from me, there is nothing left. We will get you to a maester, Oberyn said gently. Hopefully, there is something the healers can do. No. Circe cried. I don't want this. Never this. Healer or not, I will never be whole, never what I was. And even if I could, what would be the point? With no one to love, my life is pointless. She remembered the Stark boy at Winterfell. The one that Jaime had thrown from the tower window. The boy had lived, but he would never walk again. A hysterical laugh took her. The gods have a sense of justice after all. Circe frowned. But I will escape the fate they have set out for me. End this? She asked, looking up at Oberyn's scorched face. The man looked her over. Grief has this effect. Between that and the pain, you are delusional. I don't feel any pain. I have nothing left. My family is gone, my house destroyed. There is nothing to live for. She looked imploringly up at the prince. Help me. Please. I cannot. please. Cersei begged, I do not want to live my life as a cripple, a figure of ridicule and fun. That's if I even survive at all. Let me end this on my own terms. My lady. We have no time, Cersei implored him, right now there is just you and I here. Say I died in the fall. No one will know. I will know. Oberyn pointed out, we do not hurt women or children in Dorne. But we do here, Cersei hissed, your own sister was raped and murdered on my father's order. Even now this city may have claimed your daughters' lives. What are their lives next to some mortally wounded creature? Nothing at all, Oberyn answered quietly. But I cannot be goaded like that. Cersei sighed, the fight leaving her. She looked up at him one last time. Please, grant me mercy. Mercy that your own sister never received. I ask this of you, here, now, as a favor. Oberyn Martell looked at her for a long time. Finally he shook his head, you're sure? She swallowed, pushing fear away, I am a lioness of the rock. I will not quiver in fear of the unknown. Very well, Oberyn positioned himself over her prone form. Gently, oh so gently, he wrapped his hands around her throat. It will be quick. As his grip tightened, she looked into his face. A flicker of recognition went through her. Oberyn Martell, the younger brother of Elia, the woman who married Rhaegar instead of me. Rhaegar, the brother and father of the very people that took everything from me when they invaded Westeros. This was the prophecy that Maggie foretold. Oberyn Martell. The Valonqa. The old crone left one thing out. When my life was choked from me, she never said I would be afraid. That instead I welcomed it. She felt her body become starved of air. Jaime, Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, I'll be with you soon. Chapter 69, Tyrion 11. Chapter text. He watched as the candle light dwindled, the wax melting as the small light source burned its way through to the base. He had been watching it for close to half an hour, fascinated by the way the flame flickered hungrily, burning its way, inexorably, towards its own destruction. Even I would have thought the metaphor would be getting a bit thick here. His eyes were drawn to the corner of the room. There, as always, were Bronn and Pod. The sellsword was leaning against the wall, his back wedged between the rough stone blocks. Pod sat on the one small stool that had been left in the room. He used his foot to play idly with the straw at his feet, collecting it in heaps before spreading it out across the floor. They've been silent since the guard told me the news. Gods, it must be bad if even Bronn is being respectful. He looked over to them, his vigil over the candle momentarily forgotten. They made an odd pair, the hardened sellsword and the plump squire. One would be hard-pressed to find a more unilike pair. Still, who am I to judge on oddity? His former squire shifted in his seat, reddening under Tyrion's gaze. I'm so sorry, my lord. Tyrion looked back at the candle. Thank you, Pod, you've already said. You should shut your mouth, boy, Bronn commented harshly. He doesn't want to hear you wittering away. Not with the day he's having. Well, I had to say something. Pod said loudly, tears in his eyes. It's a terrible, terrible thing. It is a terrible thing, Tyrion spoke, not taking his eyes from the flame. The death of my niece, for a young girl to die in such a way, is horrific. No doubt about it. And your sister? The Queen, Pod pressed. Tyrion could only offer a shrug. His feelings for Cersei were complicated at best. He had spent much of his life as the butt of her cruel jokes and taunts. His sister, all sweetness and light to their father, had never shown even a scintilla of affection for him. Jaime had once suggested that her disposition was to do with the death of their mother in childbirth, but Tyrion was doubtful that that was the full reason. The venom his sister had oft expressed towards him often seemed to have had an undercurrent of fear along with it. More than once he had caught her looking warily at him as though she was wary of an attack. Though what his sister might have been afraid of eluded him. I barely came up to her hip, a less frightening figure it hard to imagine. There was also the fact that Jaime himself seemed to bear Tyrion no ill will. Why was it that one twin could love him as a sibling yet the other detest the very ground he walked upon? Jaime. Thoughts of his deceased sibling caused fresh tears come to Tyrion's eyes. He had barely seen his more famous sibling when he escaped the Stark's clutches and escaped to the south. Father insisted on taking him back to war almost as soon as he arrived in King's Landing. He wasn't ready, too malnourished and out of practice. It looks as though he paid for that unpreparedness with his life. Now, it seemed as if all his immediate family had died in the last few months as a result of this cursed war. First his father and Jaime and most likely Uncle Kevan as well, then Joffrey, Tommen and now Cersei and Myrcella. Gods, even cousin Lancel perished in the fight to repel Stannis' forces. I'm the only one left. Maybe there are a few of the extended family left in the Westerlands, but, with the Stark and Tyrell invasion of my homeland, I have no idea if any of them are still among the living. I could be the only Lannister in the entire realm. The thought was not an appealing one. They had not seen the explosion. Being confined to one of the deepest cells of the Red Keep resulted in them being denied access, even a basic view of the city. But even here, nestled between stone and iron bars, they had felt the vibrations and shudders as something monumental happened above them. At first they had thought they had imagined it, a reaction to having spent long days and nights imprisoned in a dank cell, but then the second vibration had hit, causing dust to come from the stone ceiling and the bars to rattle slightly. Pod had looked at Tyrion for an explanation. Even Bronn, well-traveled and experienced sellsword that he was, had gazed expectantly at him as if he would be able to explain this away as he had many others events before. Must be the dragons, Tyrion suggested, though something about it felt funny to him. The creatures I saw weren't that large. Not enough for their movement to make an impact all the way down here. Besides, why have we not felt such things before? It has not taken long for word to filter down to the cells. The guards gossiped awfully, likely their only relief from the boredom of perpetually watching their charges. The city was rife with anger, panic and fear. Along with that came the need to talk about what happened, to swap rumors and speculation about the events of the day. That evening Tyrion had listened in stunned silence as the guard who brought the prisoners food regaled him and his fellow inmates with the sorry news: the Great September was destroyed, engulfed in a torrent of wildfire just after it had played host to the funeral of Tommen. Myrcella and Cersei had been inside and were both thought killed in the flames. Gods be good. For one of the rare moments of his life Tyrion found that he had no witty retort, no pithy comeback by which he could address this calamity. He had though Cersei safe at the Great September. Not once had it occurred to him that his sister was walking towards danger. Cersei's death was bad enough, but Myrcella. Tommen. What harm had those sweet innocent children possibly have done? Who would want them dead so badly they'd destroy the entire September in order to extinguish the Lannisters? For destroyed it was. When the self-same guard brought them food the next morning, he had been convinced to share the latest gossip that confirmed that the top of Visneur's hill had been utterly obliterated. The High Septon and his man-followers were dead. Burned alive in the god's holy house. Not only that, but the city surrounding the hill had been set alight by wildfire. An area already blighted after the attack of Stannis Baratheon's fleet and army had been further decimated. Did I do this? Was the use of wildfire against Stannis nothing more than an example of how that terrible weapon could be used? He had no way of knowing, but, given the wildfire hadn't been used at all in the last 19 years but had now been used twice in the last 6 months, Tyrion could think of no other logical conclusion. And what of Shae? Tyrion's heart sank still lower and he closed his eyes in pain. Subtly he lowered his chin to his chest, the better to disguise his upset at Shae's passing. It had been just that morning that the guard had told him that Shae had been taken from her cell and sent to the Great September at the request of the Faith. The guard had had the audacity to be upset at her transfer. He had moaned that she had been very good sport and was now bitterly disappointed that he was no longer able to have the opportunity to tumble her. Tyrion had wanted to kill the man, but, even if he'd been capable, it would have been a foolish move. The man was their only connection to the outside world. It would not do to kill him. Yet. Then the calamity had happened. Tyrion had harbored hope that maybe Shae had made it out of the September, but it seemed that she had perished along with all the rest. The guards that Tyrion had pressed for information would only reveal that the Red Viper was the one and only survivor of the explosion at the Red Keep. If Prince Oberyn survived, perhaps there would be others. He had no way to know. He had to be content with sitting tight and waiting for more news. It was maddening. Bronn and Pod had been quiet for hours, allowing their former master to contemplate matters on his own without interference. Tyrion wished he could think of something to say, but the horror of the last few months was enough to make his head hurt. Grief deadened his mind and robbed his mouth of speech. It can only be a matter of time now then. Some foul force has removed Cersei and her children. Surely that same force would not leave me alive as well. There's a risk I'd take vengeance if nothing else. He wasn't sure how he felt about the concept of dying. Back when Stannis had attacked the city, he had fought for hours to repel the offenders, risking death and disfigurement at every turn. His back still caused him grief all these months later, though he found that wine dulled the throbbing pains that the wildfire had caused. That was nothing now, of course, next to the pain of losing his family. He cared not at all for Joffrey, Cersei and his father, but he felt an aching loneliness at the loss of the other three. Maybe when they do come for me I may not even fight. After all, I fought against Stannis to try and prove myself in the eyes of the family. Now, they're all dead. Hard to argue that my failure is now complete. Perhaps it would be simpler to just let them kill me and have done with it. However, the timing of any potential demise was not within his own power. He had no way of knowing what would happen to him next. So, Tyrion Lannister sat and waited patiently for whatever may come. Some hours later he was disturbed from his revelry by the sound of approaching footsteps. They were not heavy steps, but, given the silence of the cell, the echoes still reached them. Pod and Tyrion watched the door through the bars of their prison cell while Bronn got to his feet and made ready to face their visitors. Suddenly the bolt that locked the cell door was thrown back. It was loud, the clang echoing off the stone walls, but then the door swung open carefully. Here it comes. In the gloom, holding a torch aloft, was a figure Tyrion didn't recognize. The man was portly, unshaven and unkempt. He had a rough, scarred face and smelled of sour wine and sweat. The man entered the cell wing and shut the heavy wooden door behind him. "All right, you little bastards. Time to be off." The voice was like screeching steel. The three in the cell didn't respond. "Who the fuck are you?" Bronn asked wearily. "Do you not recognize me, Sir Bronn?" the figure asked, in an amused tone, the accent of the voice contrasting markedly with his earlier voice. Their visitor set his torch in a bracket high on the wall so that its light would be cast over the whole room. Oh, how quick people forget those who serve them. Tyrion's head whipped round. It hardly seemed possible. Varys. Bronn and Pod looked in surprise between the two men, one in the cell, and the other by the doorway. "Not here, my lord," the man tittered good-humouredly. "Down here among the poor souls and vermin I am known as Rajan the Undergaler. Nothing more than a humble turnkey." It was the titter that confirmed it. For the first time in a long while Tyrion found himself becoming curious. "And what, pray tell, would the vaunted Master of Whispers want with me?" "Why? To set you free, my lord." Varys' eyes drifted over Pod and Bronn. "Both you and your companions here. So, is this it? Murdered in my cell. I wonder if I'll be suicide like Joffrey or have it made to look like an accident like poor Tommen. No doubt they'll say it was on account of Cersei's death, that I was too distraught by the death of my family and opted to follow them on the dark road. They best be careful with the way they tell the story though. Those who know me are well aware that there is no love between me and my dear departed sister." Tyrion found he couldn't be bothered to move. "Well, best get on it with it then. Though I dare say neither Bronn nor Pod will go quietly." The small man with the torch looked confused. Why would they not? It would seem to be in their best interests. In their best interests to be killed. Man's as mad as he is bald. Tyrion glanced at his two cellmates. It was them he felt sorry for. He had cajoled the guards to put them in together so that he would have some company. Now though it looked as though his selfishness, his desire to not be alone, had condemned his friends. Gods, is there no end to this horror? Too fucking right it is. Bronn whispered angrily, "Let's get the hell out of here." "You poor fool, don't you see what's coming? Killed while trying to escape, talk about a classic ploy." When he saw Tyrion shake his head, Varys smiled dryly. "I assure you, my lord, my offer is genuine. If you'll allow me, I will take you through the tunnels under the Red Keep and facilitate your escape from the city." "Very kind of you, I'm sure," Tyrion remarked airily, making no attempt to rise and leave the edge of his small bed. "You'll forgive me for me not believing you. I don't know what it is, but something makes me doubt your words." Lack of credibility, I suspect. His tone did not seem to have any impact on Varys. The eunuch stood watching. I'd give you my word. Because we all know what that's worth. Tyrion cut in savagely. Did you think I'd forget that it was you who hid the Golden Company's duplicity from us? That you allowed my father and brother to go off to war with traitors in their midst? Or that you tricked us into inviting Daenerys Targaryen back to Westeros under the pretext of aiding us? Tyrion leaned back. For all I know, you connived in the deaths of my nieces, nephew and sister. Murdered them along with a great many others. Varys stared impassively at him. Have you finished? I've not even begun. Well, before you continue, let me say this: if I'm the monster you believe me to be, then you're dead either way. Varys noted, though, I assure you, if I desired your death there are multiple ways I could have procured it without having to go through the bother of standing in front of you enduring your abuse. How reassuring. We have no time to be exchanging these words, Varys said, looking behind him anxiously. It seems to me that you have nothing to lose by accepting my offer to get you out of this cell. You suspect my motives and doubt my sincerity. I accept that. A poor man I would be if I could not, but that doesn't alter my offer. Surely it is better to die in the open air with the possibility of freedom rather than die here, under the ground. He looked over the prisoners, and rest assured, my friends, death is coming for you, just as soon as winter follows autumn. He has a point. Tyrion looked at Pod and Bronn. Both were looking excitedly at home, though Bronn was wary now that he saw that Tyrion was less than keen to go with the spider. He sighed. Very well. Let us out. Varys stepped forward, retrieving a set of keys from the folds of his cloak. He set the rusted instruments in the locks, twisting boldly so that mechanism gave. With a creak the bolt pulled back and the cell door swung open. Tyrion looked upwards. Bronn. With a smirk the sellsword jumped forward and seized the plump spymaster. In an instant he had him against the cell bars with his arm at his throat, the limb pushed so deep within the fleshy neck that all Varys could do was splutter and heave as the airflow to his lungs was obstructed. Idly, Tyrion pushed himself off the bed and waddled to the door. He passed Pod, who was looking in stunned surprise at the sight of Bronn choking the life from their would-be rescuer. The imp exited the cell and stood next to where Bronn held his victim. You betrayed my family. Betrayed me, Tyrion said softly. My family is dead and gone thanks to you. Did you really think you wouldn't suffer for it if you gave me the opportunity? Varys didn't respond. He was too focused on breathing. Disappointed, Tyrion moved nearer the door that led to the surface of the Red Keep. I should thank you, though. Without your assistance we wouldn't have had the chance to escape. He got near the door, pushing down his disquiet. This man was my friend and yet he betrayed me, and now I'm watching him die. Some would call that justice. Why then am I filled with sadness? Troubled, he pulled gently at the door. The door pushed open heavily, smashing him backwards as it struck his face and chest. Giving a muted cry of shock and pain, Tyrion was knocked away from the entrance. He saw nothing but blinding light and could offer only a token resistance as he was seized around the neck and a knife set against his throat. Boldly he was jerked around until he faced back into the cell, looking directly at Bronn, Varys and Pod. He was pulled back into his assailant body so that he could not see who held him. Though whoever it was had strength to them. He couldn't move, much less mount effective resistance. Release him, the person holding Tyrion cried at Bronn. Bronn looked over at them. Why the fuck would I do that? Kill him and I slit your little friend's throat. Tyrion's captor snarled angrily. He looked up but could only see the chin of the person who held them, felt their heart hammering in their chest. Or perhaps that's my own heart I hear. Kill him, Bronn said dismissively, though he eased up on Varys. He means nothing to me. Just an employer. Love you too, you little bastard. The person behind Tyrion seemed uncertain at this response. Their grip on Tyrion tightened, the blade in their right hand started to nick the skin of his throat, but then another voice entered the fray. Big words, my friend, but once your friend is dead we'll have absolutely no reason to keep you and the little squire alive. Fuck me. Did Varys invite half of King's Landing down here to this little party? Bronn seemed to be staring intently at the two people behind Tyrion. Whatever he saw seemed to give the sellsword pause. Slowly he relinquished his hold on the spider. Are you all right, Lord Varys? Tyrion fought to keep his calm though surprise flooded him. Gods, is that a woman's voice? Quite all right, my dear, the eunuch responded, soothing his bruised throat with his left hand. Thank you for interceding, though it was quite unnecessary. Seemed necessary from we were standing. The second voice, a man's, was full of humor and warmth. Looks as if you got yourself in a right ship it. Eloquent as always, my boy, Varys said, but I had everything under control. Bronn turned a sarcastic look on him, like fuck you did. The sellsword's voice cut off abruptly. Tyrion was astounded to see Bronn's face become suffused with a great deal of concern and anxiety. The man had frozen and he was looking down to his groin. In the harsh torchlight Tyrion made out the glint of a knife. Varys had pulled a small stiletto out of his robe and had been holding it towards the inside of Bronn's thigh. One twist and he would have cut through the leather trousers and the crucial artery next to the man's groin. Once again Varys repeated, his voice hard, I had things under control. Now, Sir Bronn, if you wouldn't mind. Quickly Bronn gave up his grip on the eunuch and stepped away from both the small man and his wickedly sharp knife. The sellsword kept his arms apart, pointed outwards from his sides as if eager to point out that he posed no threat right now. Can't say I blame him. Now, Varys said as he pulled away, casually adjusting his clothes that had become disheveled at Bronn's attack, if we've quite finished with theatrics, perhaps we should be on our way. Love to oblige, I'm tied up right now, Tyrion commented, moving his eyes upwards so as to indicate the person holding him. He dare not move his head for fear of cutting his own throat. If he has any sense he'll have my throat slit and be done with it. Please release Lord Tyrion, my dear, Varys said politely to the imp's captor. We came to rescue him, remember. He's right, Beskar, the man in Varys's little group commented, pointless of us to come down here if we kill the dwarf now. But he almost killed Lord Varys. The woman's tone was angry, confused. Shouldn't hold that against him, my dear, Varys replied smoothly, I have wronged both him and his family. Quite natural he'd want vengeance. Even so, please let him go. With a grunt of frustration, the arm holding Tyrion slackened, the blade dropped away. Sighing with relief, Tyrion took a deep breath before he looked at the person who had been holding him. As expected, he was confronted with a woman, clad in warrior armor, her skin tanned, bronzed from too long in the sun. Her hair was jet black and cascaded down her back to her waist. Her most striking feature, unfortunately, was the scared face that now glared at Tyrion expectantly. Perhaps she expects me to recoil in horror. Well, if that's the case, she's going to be sorely disappointed. Bit short, aren't you? He noted with a serious look on his face. The woman glowered, though the man behind her laughed. He's got balls, this one. Tyrion glanced to the side. There, just inside the doorway, was a young handsome warrior in leather armor. He had short light brown hair and a beard that had been trimmed in such a way that it was made to look a little wild. He had a definite twinkle in his eye and a charming grin that couldn't help elicit a small smile. Bet this one is a hit with the ladies. I'll thank you to leave the size of my balls out of. He gave a shrug and casual smile, though they are considerable. No doubt, this is where my friend points out that I have no balls at all, Varys said as he stepped towards them. He sheathed the small knife back into the folds of his clothing. Very droll, my lord, but I promise to listen to all your insults later. However, for now, we must leave this place, before the guards come to. I'm no friend of yours. Tyrion said bitterly as he looked cautiously at the warrior woman behind him. Not the way to treat your savior. Do you forget? Tyrion fired back, that it is as a result of your actions that we were imprisoned in the first place. Very true, Varys allowed before giving a small smile. However, it is also a result of my work that you are still alive. He cast a worried glance over Tyrion's shoulder towards the door. And, if you do as I say, I mean to keep you that way. Why should I go anywhere with you? The eunuch's eyes flicked around the room's surroundings. You'd rather stay here? Fuck no. Bronn said from where he stood, hands still partially raised, I want to get out of here. Varys nodded decisively, then let us make haste. He strode past Tyrion without a second glance and stood next to the man and woman by the door. He turned one last time. If I wished I could kill you now. My two companions are armed and I doubt very much they'd have trouble with yourself or young Podrick. Sir Bronn would be more troublesome for them, but, unarmed, he would eventually fall. Is this meant to comfort me? Yes, Varys said quietly. If I wanted you dead, my lord, you'd be dead. Tyrion scratched the back of his head. That's not that reassuring. Varys smiled. I can imagine. But it is the reality. Come with me now, and you have a chance of survival. Stay here and you most certainly do not. The imp looked back at Pod and Bronn. Both of them looked eager to take their chances. He sighed, and I am too cowardly to want to be left here alone. He looked at Varys. Seems I have an answer after all. I don't wish to die quite yet. Then lead on, Lord Varys. The eunuch turned and whispered in the ear of the man next to him, then he stepped back and slowly opened the wooden door. This time there was no one on the other side and the spymaster disappeared into the shadows. He was followed by the woman who still had a knife at her side. Off you go then. Varys' male companion ordered firmly, we've wasted enough time as it is. As they passed the man and followed Varys into the corridor, Tyrion heard Bronn ask, and just who the fuck are you meant to be? My apologies, the man's arm voice came back, allow me to introduce myself, my name's Asher. Asher Forrester. Out in the corridor they barely had time to get their bearings before Varys had taken off through the dim passageway. An instant later the warrior woman, Beskha, followed carrying a new torch aloft in one hand, her knife glinting in the other. Tyrion was surprised at the direction the other man had taken. He hesitated. We're going the wrong way. This doesn't go back to the surface. Are you waiting for an engraved invitation? Asher Forrester's voice sounded behind them as he waved the torch he had removed from the bracket in the cell. Sighing, Tyrion quickly followed in the wake of the first two. His small legs pumped hard as he worked furiously to keep pace with the much taller individuals. Within minutes he was out of breath as he followed the path that Varys led them down. Despite not having a torch himself, the eunuch did not appear to be at a disadvantage. He seemed to know each twist and turn to go down. Abruptly the corridor ended at the base of a thick wall. There was a small cell off to the side, but their leader ignored it, coming to a stop by the stone slab in front of him. Fucking brilliant. Bronn said from behind Pod, genius had brought us to a dead end. Tyrion was inclined to believe different. He had learned long ago not to underestimate the Master of Whisperers. One did not stay alive so close to the Iron Throne by being stupid, and certainly, for his part, their would-be rescuer did not look put out by the obstruction that now confronted them. For someone who made their name setting fire to the Blackwater, Varys said as he felt around the stone surface in front of him, I'd have thought you'd be more inclined to believe that not everything is what it seems. Varys' hand paused by a small stone block, his fingers circling the space. Suddenly he gripped the block and twisted sharply to the right. With a slight click a catch was released and, with a gentle shove from Varys, the wall sprang inwards as if on a hinge. Fuck me. Bronn hissed quietly. Well, quite, Varys said softly, now quickly. The group carried on through the passageway. A soft click behind them indicated that Asher Forrester had resealed the doorway behind them before he moved to follow the rest of the group. After a minute or two of blindly scrabbling after the woman in front of him, they arrived at the base of a long metal ladder that was sent into the rock face. We must climb, Varys said as he tucked any loose material of his outfit into his belt and boots. He looked at them in the gloom, his face illuminated by the torch held by Beskha. I warn you now, it is a long way to the surface and there will be no opportunity to stop once we have started. Also, none of us will be able to carry a torch whilst we climb, so we'll be in almost total darkness. Another metaphor. Tyrion stared upwards, following the ladder as it disappeared into the inky black of a tunnel. The distance was immeasurable. How far? Does it matter? Varys asked. It's the only way to the surface from here. You either make the climb or you stay here and die. Decisions, decisions. Well, when you put it that way. Varys smiled grimly and reached for the nearest rung to his head. He gripped it with strong hands and then climbed steadily. Within seconds he was scaling the ladder like a rat up a pipe. Bastard's done this before. Beskha extinguished her torch and then followed Varys, rising rapidly until she was out of sight. Taking a deep breath, Tyrion followed. He put a lot of effort into scaling the ladder, but he knew he was going a lot slower than those ahead of him. Thankfully it seemed that Pod was right below him. The boy's heavy breathing was relatively comforting in the darkness as Tyrion reached hand over hand to climb upwards. though what he was climbing towards he would have given all the gold still in Casterly Rock, to find out. Way below him the final light died as Asher Forrester dispensed with his own torch. Tyrion was now in total blackness. He couldn't even see the hands grasping the rungs in front of him. For a moment he felt panic grip him, but, with an act of sheer will, he set it aside and continued to climb. It seemed that his whole world became about the infernal climb. His arms and legs pumped as he pushed himself upwards, fearfully wondering if, in his mad scurry to escape the tunnel, he'd smack into the undersoles of Beskha's boots and tumble blindly to him doom. He needn't have worried, the warrior woman was far ahead of him. Taking a steady breath and fighting fatigue, Tyrion continued to climb. It was some time older before they reached the surface. Abruptly, the soft wind and smell of the sea hit him. Buoyed by the prospect of escaping the tunnel, Tyrion increased his efforts and, suddenly he emerged on the surface. He was seized by the scruff of his neck and hauled boldly out of the tunnel and deposited on the soft floor of a seaside cave. He took a series of deep breaths, trying to capture some much-needed air. He reached down and massaged his calf that had started to cramp. Gods, I wouldn't want to do that again. Behind him he heard Pod reach the top of the ladder and scramble onto the floor next to Tyrion. His former squire was short-breathed and his arms were shaking. His face was lined with sweat, his hair plastered to his face. I dare say I look no better. Bronn was next through the hole. He was in a much better shape than Tyrion or Pod. He merely lifted himself over the rim and rose deftly to his feet on the other side. Once he's got to his feet he put his head between his legs and breathed deeply. Finally, Asher appeared, climbing up and over the rim. Quickly now, Varys ordered, cover the hole so that it's not spotted. As Varys and his friends went about covering the entrance, Tyrion took a moment to take in his surroundings. He was in a small cave. The sound of flowing water nearby told him that he was near a beach, probably Blackwater Bay if I had to guess. The fact that there was no light in the cave indicated to Tyrion it was dark outside. Varys walked past him, adjusting his cloak and cowl to obscure his features. Wait here a moment. I need to check to see if your ship has arrived. Ship? Tyrion wanted to ask a question, but, no sooner than he said the words, had the eunuch disappeared out of the small cave entrance, his footfall softened by the muddy sand. Bronn looked around at Tyrion as if to ask whether this was the time to make a break for it. The imp considered. True, he wasn't a supporter of spending any more time with Varys than he had to, but then he had no plan of getting away on his own. For all his treachery, it had to be said that at least Varys had a plan. A scheme behind all his actions. Whether the scheme is in our favor is quite a different matter, of course. Tyrion spied Pod, who was still in the process of recovering himself. He glanced at his own sore legs that still throbbed from the effort of the climb. We're hardly in a condition to flee. If the city garrison comes for us, we'd be fortunate to get half a league before being run down. No, we'll have to wait to see if Varys can get us safely out of here. Subtly he shook his head at Bronn. You're welcome to leave. Asher Forrester said, eyeing them knowingly. He took a drink from a water skin he'd had on his hip. You're not prisoners. Tyrion pushed himself into a seated position. I thank you for the invitation. But I think we'll stay here for a moment. Admire the view. Asher chuckled as he offered the water around. Bronn took a deep slug from the skin until he passed it reluctantly to Tyrion. The refreshing liquid surged down Tyrion's throat, tickling his insides and causing him to choke slightly. He coughed harshly before handing over the skin to Pod, who took it from him gratefully. How did you find yourself in the spider's company? Tyrion asked in between coughs. Ah, well, that is a story. Asher said. He found us after Queen Daenerys arrived in the city. Found us in a tavern down near Flea Bottom. Don't know how he knew who I was. But he did. Smart bastard that one. Doesn't sound much like a story to me. Tyrion was confused. With the coughing now abated, he risked another question. And just who are you? Why would your identity mean anything to Varys? The name Forrester means nothing to you. Something irritated the imp's memory, but he couldn't place the name, should it? He asked, a little harsher than he intended. Perhaps not, the youth smiled. I am the son of Gregor Forrester, the Lord of Ironroth. Ironroth. Tyrion blinked softly. In the north. That's right, Asher said, laughing at Tyrion's perplexity. We're vassals to House Glover. Our lands are in the Wolf's Wood. Your house farms the Ironwood. Bronn said as he leaned against the cave wall, makes shield, bows and the like. That's right. It's a good trade and makes the house a good deal of money. What? Bronn asked. He saw Tyrion's look of confusion that was directed at him. Ironwood makes for good weapons and the Foresters are the only ones who can farm it successfully. Never seen the castle-forged steel that can get through an ironwood shield. Except perhaps something made of Valyrian steel, but there's nothing that can stand against that. So. As much as I love to learn about weapons making, Tyrion cut in, but if you're from the north, what the hell are you doing in the Targaryen army? Beskha and I came over from Essos. I guessed that. Tyrion said irritably. Doesn't explain what you were doing there in the first place. Asher said, and for the first time the warmth seemed to fade from him, replaced by a wistful sadness. Well, that actually ties in with the Ironwood in a funny kind of way. I like funny tales, Tyrion said, leaning back. When he saw Asher look towards the exit of the cave, where Beskha was faithfully standing watch, Tyrion offered the youth what he hoped to be a disarming smile. It would appear as if we have a little time. Come, I would know the story of one of those that rescued us. Casting one last glance at the entrance, Asher returned his eyes to Tyrion. All right, well, as I say, the successful farming of ironwood is relatively lucrative. We're not a rich house, but we do all right. If you could make more weapons, you'd be a damn sight richer, Bronn observed. Asher ignored him. Unfortunately, wealth of any sort comes with it a certain amount of rivals. No need to tell me about those. Just look at the Rains and Castamarez. Brought low by their incessant desire to try and be the most powerful in the Westerlands. In the case of our house, Asher went on, it was House Whitehill, who owe allegiance to the Boltons. Our two houses have been rivals for generations. Almost broke out in open war several times, but we've always managed to maintain an uneasy peace, usually at the behest of Winterfell. Until. Tyrion prompted. Asher let out a sigh. Until I feel in love with the daughter of the current Lord Whitehill. Her name was Quinn. I bet her father fucking loved that. Bronn said, smirking. The Northman gave the sellsword a small smile. He was less than pleased. Despite Quinn and I wanting to marry, her father wouldn't have it. He threatened all-out war between our houses. My father decided that rather than bringing death and destruction to our lands, he would send me across the narrow sea to Essos. He exiled his own son. Bronn objected, looking scandalized. He chose your enemies over you. Asher's face hardened, and Tyrion knew that this was a thought that had kept the young man up for many nights. He had no choice. Asher said softly, my father offered single combat between himself and the champion of House Whitehill's choosing, but their lord, Lud, refused. Clearly knew my father could have wiped the floor with anyone sent against him. No, old man Lud said that either I was handed over to answer for the insult of raping his daughter, or he would attack Ironwrath. But you hadn't raped her. Pod had scooted back against the cave wall. His breathing had returned to normal, but he was looking anguished at Asher's tail. No. Asher answers, with a far-off look in his eye, I did not. It was love, nothing base or horrible about it. He sighed as he crouched nearby. In any case, the Whitehills called on House Bolton for support, which forced my father to call for House Glover to aid us. The whole thing was escalating beyond our control. Hundreds of lives and families were at risk, and all for the love of a woman who would not be mine in any event. Her father wouldn't have allowed us to marry. The man took another breath. In the end, my father felt he had no choice. He contacted House Stark to mediate the dispute and offered to send me into exile. If it was love, I wonder that this Quinn didn't come with you. Tyrion commented. Asher gave him an angry look. She wanted to. But her father locked her up and threatened that if she escaped, he would still have his vengeance on the Foresters. He looked contemplatively at the floor. I imagine by now she's been married off to another lordling to try and sate her father's ambitions. She has not. Varys' voice carried to them as he entered the cave. Indeed, she has obstinately refused to marry despite her father's best efforts. The eunuch pulled back his cowl to reveal his bald features. Apologies, my friends, but it appears that the boat has been waylaid on its journey here. I would guess that it has had to change its route to us on account of the patrols that scour the bay. So what is the plan now? Tyrion asked. We wait, Varys said simply as he sat on a large rock. The boat will arrive soon. I have no doubt. We still have hours of darkness left. Our haste was to try and get you out of the city before daylight. It will allow you the most time to get away. And go where? You say Gwyn hasn't married. Asher's voice was full of hope. Tyrion knew he shouldn't get attached, but he found himself slightly taken with the youngster. I hope for his sake he's about to hear good news. No. She hasn't. Varys looked preoccupied. She has refused all suitors. Or manipulated her father into doing the same. It's a pity now though. A marriage pact might have been most beneficial to House Whitehill right now. How so? Tyrion inquired on Asher's behalf. Varys gathered his cloak about him. The Whitehills are allied to the Boltons, who are leading a rebellion in the north against House Stark. Unfortunately, Lord Eddard has returned to his homeland and is, even now, in the act of putting down the rebellion. And doing so most efficiently, I must say. One only imagines what will happen to those houses who supported the Boltons. The Starks have a rather ruthless fixation with justice. Hopefully Lord Whitehill will surrender, beg Lord Eddard's mercy. You never told me. Asher was on his feet looking outraged. Varys fixed him with a steady gaze. You never asked. Besides, he waved a hand dismissively, there's not a lot to be done about it down here in the south. He looked at Asher. Relax, dear boy, by morning you will be on your way north and you can effect a rescue of your beloved should she require it. What about us? Tyrion said, indicating Bronn and Pod. What is to become of us? Varys turned his steady gaze on him. That very much depends on you. I had to liberate Asher and Beskar from the city owing to the fact that the young man's unfortunate lineage was about to be uncovered by Lysa Nomer of the Golden Company. He has been asked by Lord Connington to identify possible northern spies within the city. Varys shot a glance at Asher. Sadly, my boy, you stand out like a Dornishman at the wall. I'd hate to think what would have happened had I not got to you first. So why get us out? Tyrion inquired. It was the one question that made no sense to him. The eunuch looked at him in surprise. Why? Because if I did not, you'd be killed by your enemies. Forgive me skepticism, my lord, Tyrion said quietly, with a touch of steel in his voice, but I find it very hard to believe that you care about our well-being. Oh, but I do, Varys said earnestly. I care very much about you and your companions. They were instrumental in fighting Stannis. All three of you proved your usefulness. You all stood when others fled. I find that commendable and worthy of reward. I promised you, my lord, when you lay injured after the battle, that some of us would never forget what you did. I hope this action here proves that. And yet you betrayed us. Tyrion snapped, got my father and brother killed at Harrenhal. Varys sighed. He attempted to tuck his arms into his sleeves, and momentarily forgetting was not wearing his customary long robes. For a comical moment his arms clutched in vain at the much shorter fabric of his sleeves. Tutting in annoyance, Varys returned his attention to the three cellmates. All I did, he said softly, was for the realm. The war between the Lannisters and the Starks had to end. With the Reach sided with the Starks and the Tullys, with the Westerlands conquered and the Vale out of the picture, there was only one realistic outcome. A Lannister defeat. Tyrion snarled. Indeed, Varys said simply, the Lannister cause was doomed the moment Robb Stark married Margaery Tyrell. Even if the young wolf hadn't been crowned king, they would most likely have supported Stannis. At the mention of Robert's brother, the eunuch shuddered. There was never a conceivable way for your father to win. He thought differently. Of course he did, Varys replied. Lord Tywine was one of the most intelligent, cunning and resourceful people I ever had the honor of knowing. Your father ruled ably as hand while the king descended into madness. Without him, Aerys would have lost his crown a lot quicker. I regret the need to deceive him, but it was necessary. Necessary? Tyrion scoffed. You may find this hard to believe, Varys said, putting his hands on his knees, but I abhor death. Killing, pain, suffering, they are all an affront to me. If I could have saved your father and his army, I would have done so. Sadly, your father was too proud to admit defeat. When I saw he was set on fighting, that exile or surrender were simply not an option for him, then I had to engineer his defeat as quickly as possible. Tyrion struggled to his feet as he glared angrily at the bald man. And Jaime. Alas, Varys looked pained. Your brother was not supposed to be at the battle. He was safely held captive in the Riverlands and well away from the fighting. Were it not for your father's scheme with Roose Bolton and Walder Free, he would never have been freed, though I can't say how safe he'd have been under Queen Daenerys. You maintain you knew nothing about my father's plans for Edmure Tully's wedding. Nothing at all. Varys shook his head sadly. Your father did not involve me in the planning and sent all messages directly through Grand Maester Pycelle. Believe me, the revelation of the scheme was just as much a surprise to me as to you. I don't believe you, Tyrion spat, seething with anger, but that doesn't matter. What I want to know is why you supported the Targaryens. Why convince me to bring the Golden Company here? As I recall, that was your idea. I simply took advantage of the fact the Lord Connington was a former commander of the group. It was easy enough to contact him and have him and Aegon re-enlist under new names. And after that, Tyrion said, interrupting the spymaster, why convince my father to invite Daenerys Targaryen here? Why betray us? I have always supported House Targaryen. Varys declared, I was brought to Westeros at the request of King Aerys, who raised me up and blessed me with his trust. I have not forgotten that. What it appears you have forgotten is your own family's tainted past. Your father betrayed the king when he marched his army and sacked the city, killing hundreds. Your father had what he thought were the young prince and princess murdered and did nothing when his men raped the wife of Prince Rhaegar. You may argue that Lord Tywin's actions in marching here ended the war, but the death and destruction he brought with him was an abomination. Armies sack cities, Bronn noted dryly, it's what they do. Quite, Varys said coolly, nodding at the sellsword before turning to the imp, your father knew that Lord Tyrion and he did it anyway. The deaths here were a terrible crime and, what's worse, completely unnecessary. Oh, not so unnecessary. Without father's attack, Jaime would never have had the chance to kill Aerys and prevent the wholesale destruction of the entire city. The entirety of King's Landing would have looked much like what I suspect the Great September looks like now. Varys was staring knowingly at him but did not speak immediately. After a long pause he opened his mouth. As I say, the war was over in all but name. The scheme at the wedding was your father's last attempt to divide his foes, and it failed. The only thing it achieved, beyond the deaths of so many people, was that it made Lord Tywin desperate enough to call on Daenerys Targaryen for aid. I convinced her to play along with his suggestions and respond to his invitation. But why the Targaryens at all? Tyrion said. He had pondered this for a while and wanted an answer. Why not just have the Starks become victorious? Why bring in a new faction? Out of loyalty, Varys whispered, and the fact that House Targaryen has done so much good for the Seven Kingdoms in the past. Brought along a great deal of horror as well. Seeing his audience was unconvinced, Varys elaborated, Aegon has been born and raised to be a king. Daenerys is of the blood of old Valyria. Both of them together could usher the realm into a new era of prosperity and peace. I have observed them at first hand. They are stubborn and willful, but that can be tempered. They have the ability to be great. They only need assistance. Which only you can provide. Tyrion asked slyly. Not just I, Varys stated, Lord Connington, Doran Martell, Barristan Selmy. All good men with a desire to do well by the people we would rule. Varys shifted on his rock, and not only them. I hoped that the Starks would buttress the Targaryen support. What? Tyrion was lost. It was to be so neat and simple, Varys mused contemplatively. The Starks had conquered most of the Seven Kingdoms. They had allies and supporters in almost all of the noble houses. What's more, they had no actual desire to rule. Robb Stark, by all accounts, was much like his father. Even marriage to a Tyrell would not blunt his desire to go home when the fighting was done. Northern honor would trump Southern ambition. By bringing back two new young rulers who have the right but not the experience, we could forge a new dynasty between the Targaryens and the Starks. In one move we would have reunited the realm with the rightful rulers on the throne. Varys seemed to wipe a tear from his eye. Both sides agreed to marry their heirs to each other. We could have ended any conflict through marriage rather than war. It would have been a glorious achievement, but, sadly, it is not to be. Oh. The eunuch looked sadly at Tyrion. The sad deaths of your nephews and niece, coupled with the explosion at the Great September, will be the death knell of any alliance. Already rumors abound that dragons were seen near the September. that the Targaryens have exacted a fiery revenge for the High Septons intransigence. Whispers decrying Daenerys and Aegon of being a new Maegor the Cruel or the Mad King are heard across the city even now, as the Queen's forces attempt to put out the blaze. Tyrion looked intently at the man sat in front of him. He was so short that they were practically eye to eye. If it wasn't you or your allies, then who killed my family? Who killed Shae? I don't know, Varys said, and Tyrion could see that the cost of such an admission for the eunuch was high indeed. Something moves behind the scenes, hidden from my eyes. My little birds know nothing, have reported nothing. Joffrey's death was a surprise and could have been dismissed as a suicide, despite my misgivings. But the death of Tommen and now Myrcella and your sister is conclusive. Someone is acting against your family and is wiping out potential enemies. Varys' eyes came up and looked levelly at Tyrion. Had I believed that your family was in danger I would have acted to stop it, but my enemy caught me napping. He offered a sad smile. I cannot make up for what I've done. All I can do now is to try and thwart those who have killed innocent children and would seek to bring the realm to war. Varys stood and gathered his cloak as he looked at the 5 people sharing the cave with him. Saving the lot of you and getting you out of here will be a good start. Tyrion was astounded. He had assumed that Varys had been responsible for killing his family. Not, it seems as though that might not be the case. If I take the duplicitous bastard at his word, and what kind of fool would do that? The eunuch was looking out of the cave entranceway. I believe I see the boat now, my friends. A few more minutes and then we'll be on our way. The imp was shaken from his thoughts. On our way where? Where in the entire world is a Lannister safe now? Young Asher and Beskar are on their way to the north, stopping off at Antlers to see Robb Stark. I would suggest you do the same. Robb Stark. Tyrion couldn't have been more surprised than if Varys had suddenly spread his arms and flown away. He's the enemy. Not anymore. Varys said calmly, taking no notice of Tyrion's shocked expression. The war is over. In fact, it was Robb Stark who made the condition of your family's safety as part of his alliance with the Targaryens. Much good though it did them. Tyrion muttered darkly. Agreed, Varys replied, but Robb Stark needn't have done anything at all about your family. Instead he at least tried to keep them safe. Besides, the person who killed Cersei and her children is your enemy. The Targaryens are your enemy. Who better to seek sanctuary with than the Starks? What, and save Robb Stark the trouble of arranging my death? Tyrion was not convinced. Just stick my neck out so that he can hack it through. If Robb Stark wanted to have you executed he could have included that in the treaty stipulations. He did not, instead he wished for your safety. It is the fact that your nephews and niece are dead that will most likely lead to war. It could be an elaborate double bluff, Tyrion argued. Make pretend that he wants his enemies safe, makes the Targaryens swear that we'll be unharmed and then kill us off so that they can make war against the Targaryens while claiming to be the righteous avenger of dead children. I had considered that, Varys conceded, but do you believe that the Starks are capable of that kind of scheming? Perhaps not, Tyrion retorted, but if the rumors are right then the Tyrells most certainly are. They are, Varys said, once more looking out of the cave, but if they are responsible then they'll have a hard time disposing of you if you're right under the young wolf's nose. He nodded definitively. The boat has arrived, let's leave. Tyrion watched uncertainly as the 4 others gathered themselves. Varys moved closer to him. You can leave, my lord. The boat could take you anywhere along the coast once it has dropped off Asher and Beskar upriver. Upriver? Bronn blurted out, having overheard. There is no alternative, Varys said. Blackwater Bay is subject to a blockade. Every ship is searched. It is far too risky to go that way. By instead heading west you can disembark further inland and follow the river towards the God's Eye. He eyed them all. It will still be dangerous, but it is safer than remaining here or heading east. He looked down at Tyrion, who was now close enough to smell the musk on his cloak. The choice of what you do, my lord, is entirely in your own power. In a few minutes we will part, and I think it doubtful we will ever see each other again. You're not coming with us? Tyrion asked, surprised. Oh no, old friend. Varys said, I made my bed when I brought the Targaryens back to Westeros. I am responsible for everything that happens with Daenerys and Aegon in charge. I was arrogant enough to believe that I could write the realm's destiny. Now, with that destiny on a knife edge, I must do whatever I can to push this story to a peaceful conclusion. I'm not your friend. Tyrion reminded him sadly, surprised at how bereft he felt at the proclamation. That saddens me, my lord, Varys whispered, but I ask you to believe I had nothing to do with Tommen and Myrcilla's death. I would never hurt children. He didn't mention Joffrey. Clever bastard knows that I couldn't give a sparrow's fart about that little ingrate. Varys looked at Tyrion with an intensity the imp had never seen before. I would like to offer one piece of advice, however: travel with Asher and Beskar to the Stark camp. Go before Robb Stark and ask for his protection. Who knows, he might need your help before too long. Meaning? Listen carefully, my lord, Varys muttered as they walked out of the cave, heads low so as to avoid being seen. I have one last thing to tell you. The boat was not far. The rickety rowboat was nestled between two mud banks, hidden from sight from the dunes above. Though it was dark, the sky to the east was red and angry. If Tyrion had to guess, that would be where the wildfire still raged in the city, resisting even the most fervent efforts of the small folk to extinguish it. Tyrion resisted the urge to think back to the day of Stannis' attack. Varys handed over a bag full of coins to the captain of the little craft, a sullen man with strong arms and a massive beard. The eunuch helped keep the boat in place as the small party clambered aboard. He's got a bigger boat crewed by his two sons a bit further out. It's a merchant ship that goes up and down the coast, so it will be more than big enough to get you where you're going. Grab some fucking oars and help, you pig fuckers. The captain snarled at the group. Bemused at the old man's malevolence, they all quickly picked up a small wooden paddle. As Tyrion dipped his oar into the water, he reached over and whispered to Varys, "How do we know we can trust you?" "You don't," Varys said simply as he pulled himself back. "Either follow my advice or not. Nothing here is certain. At least that's honest." Not a very satisfactory state of affairs, Tyrion noted as the boat started to drift away from the shore. "Well, that's life," Varys noted as he began his walk back to the city. "What more can I tell you?" Chapter 70, Daenerys 6. Chapter text. She stood helplessly as the city burned before her. Where once the flames had been limited to a few buildings, the conflagration had spread to encompass the surrounding area. Now entire streets were ablaze, consigned to green flame that ripped through the wooden and stone structures like dry kindling. Visnya's hill was now naught but a smoking ruin. There was nothing left of the top of the hill, which had exploded in a torrent of mud and fire that had showered onto the unsuspecting city below. What has once been a hub of activity, of worship and faith, was now a desolate wasteland with an ever-spreading ring of fire spreading from it. Everywhere she looked, her men were trying vainly to fight the flames. Unsullied and Dornish men were pouring vast vats of water on the fire, running back and forth from local wells to replenish their supplies. Dany turned to the man at her side. "How do we put the fire out?" Wisdom Hallin, a pallid man, clad in the dark robes of the Alchemist Guild, shuffled his feet, looking uncertain. "I have told your grace that I don't know. It is said you worked with Tyrion Lannister to set up the wildfire trick on the Blackwater." I did," the small man said, nodding vigorously, his eyes lighting up at the memory. It took the work of a moment for him to realize that he was effectively admitting that not so long ago he had conspired with the Targaryen's enemies. "Well, that is to say, I played a minor role." "Enough." Dany snapped as she watched the fire spread still further, slowly encompassing another row of houses in its grip. "What I want to know is, how do you put the damn thing out?" The man looked unhappily towards the blaze. "It is extremely difficult to extinguish the flames, your grace. Ordinarily the fire will continue until it burns itself out. Until that time it will seep into almost any material and set that alight as well." Hallin suddenly looked hopeful. "The only way is to cover the fire, your grace, suffocate the flame. In the Alchemist's Guild we use sand." "You expect me to cover the city in sand?" Dany spat. Her horse twisted angrily under her in response to her fury. "No, your grace, of course not," Hallin muttered miserably. "That is obviously not an option here." "Well then what?" Dany rounded on the man. "If I had Drogon here, I'd be hard-pressed not have him devour the little man. Am I supposed to just sit here and watch as the entirety of King's Landing burns down around me? You're supposed to be an expert." "I wish I could advise you, your grace," Hallin said, rubbing his face in perplexity, "but we have nothing in the histories to compare to this. We in the guild are used to controlling small amounts of the substance, and even that control requires the most disciplined practices, years of study to perfect. What of Stannis's attack? Dany asked, cutting the man off before she ordered his head to be removed from his body. Lord Varys tells me that almost the entire eastern wall was engulfed in flame after the imp's attack was countered. Then, as if by magic, the flames died off. It saved hundreds of lives. How was it done? I don't know. Howlin almost wailed in response. He took a deep breath. Your Grace, I have been working on fire since I was but a boy, and I swear I have never seen it react in that way. It could be a multitude of different things: wind direction, volume of wildfire involved, the fact the explosion took place on the water. And that would explain why the fire suddenly died out. Well, Howlin said contemplatively, there is always the possibility that Stannis employed his own magic users to counter the imp's plans. He really has no idea. Daenerys watched yet another row of houses set alight. She looked down at the old man below her. Then perhaps I should look into procuring their services rather than yours. I might get more satisfaction from them than I am likely to get from you. The wisdom looked downcast, brought low by his failure. Your Grace, I. Go away, she said, turning a pinched face back towards the blaze. I charge you with devising a method to get this damn fire under control. Put every one of you fellow pyromancers onto the task. While the city burns, none of you sleep. Fail me and I shall have your guild broken up and the lot of you sent to the wall. As the wisdom scuttled fearfully away, back towards the alchemist guild, Dany grit her teeth in frustration. Utterly useless. Jorah and Connington told me it might be a pointless endeavor, but I had to try. Your Grace. Dany moved her head a fraction as Sir Barristan Selmy rode up to her. Your Grace, I must insist you withdraw. This time she did tear her gaze away from the fires to take in Sir Barristan. The old knight's face was red from the heat of the fire. Sweat beaded from the top of his head to trickle in small streams down his face. I am far enough away from the flames, sir. And I'm not sure they'd hurt me in any case. Though, having said that, Jorah tells me that one of my ancestors poured wildfire down his throat in an attempt to become a dragon. He died screaming. What a fool he must have been. But at least he serves as a cautionary tale for those of us who presume to call ourselves the blood of the dragon. The knight frowned at her. Your Grace, it is not just the fire that concerns me. Crowds have started to gather. We ordered them to gather, Sir Barristan. The gold cloaks urgently need assistance fighting the flames. Who better to help than those whose lives and property are threatened? Yes, but this is more like a mob. They are 2 streets down and working their way towards us. They've been whipped up into a frenzy. They are blaming you and the king for the explosion and the fires. What? Dany could scarcely credit it. Selmy looked behind him. Your Grace, we must withdraw. The mob is a large one and I do not have the men to hold this position if the situation becomes violent. I will not run from these people. As she had the thought, Dany looked about her. There was only a handful of Unsullied guarding her, along with a few gold cloaks that Jorah had assigned to her for protection. There was barely 20 men with her. Hardly an army. Though, as she looked into the Unsullied faces, she knew they would die for her if she asked. No, I cannot allow them to die because I was too obstinate to move. She sighed angrily. We shall withdraw to the Red Keep. Her voice was loud and carried to those around her. Sir Barristan looked gratefully at her. Thank you, Your Grace. As she wheeled her horse round, Dany fought back tears. Forced to retreat while the city built by my forefathers burns around me. What kind of queen am I? Hours later she watched the city from a window in her solar. Dawn was breaking across the eastern horizon. Although the new day's light would assist rescuers, Dany feared her heart would break when the sight of the devastation could be more easily seen. And yet still she stood, looking out at King's Landing, yearning to help her people as they fought a seemingly endless war against the flame. We should order the Golden Company into the city, a voice sounded behind her. The other mercenary companies too. Dany did not face the speaker. Did not even acknowledge that someone had been speaking. Khaleesi, a different voice countered, I am the first to admit that we need the assistance in battling the fire, but I fear that bringing in sellswords will merely stir up the hatred against us. Another voice behind Dany scoffed, at least they'd still be alive to do the hating. Dany closed her eyes in pain. She could endure this no more. Turning to face her visitors, she crossed her arms over her chest. Aegon is quite correct, Ser Jorah. The city needs to be made safe. For that we need as many men as possible. We have thousands of men outside the city, we should put them to work. Jorah Mormont frowned. Khaleesi, I can understand your feelings. No, Jorah, I don't believe that you do. Dany's face was hard, her voice unyielding. The capital is ablaze. Hundreds lie dead. Hundreds more are dispossessed or have lost their homes and livelihood. The flames continue to burn, the small folk are on the verge of revolt. We must do everything in our power to bring the city under control. Now. Ser Jorah's head sagged to his chest. Dany felt an aching sympathy for the man. He has worked through the night to put this right, but his men are overwhelmed. I charged him with the defense of the city and he feels he's failed. Lord Connington stepped forward. I share Ser Jorah's concerns. Having the sellswords in the city would create more problems. While we may be able to corral some of them into helping the relief efforts, the fact is some will use the chaos to engage in looting, perhaps even rape, giving the people even more cause to hate us. How has it come to this? Why must men resort to their baser natures at the first opportunity? We can rebuild goodwill, Aegon argued from his place at the council table. Rebuilding the city will prove more difficult and expensive. When Dany raised an eyebrow at him, the king raised a hand. I am not indifferent to the suffering of the small folk, my queen. I simply believe that we have to prioritize here. The fire comes first. I agree. Dany declared simply. She shot Mormont a look before he could protest. Satisfied that he would stay quiet, she looked to the small council table. Sitting, opposite Aegon, was Daario Naharis, who was idly sharpening one of his wicked-looking knives. He had his feet up on the polished wood, idly scraping a whetstone across the knife's narrow blade. Daario, have the Storacrows move into the city, order them to assist the Unsullied and the City Watch with the relief efforts. Order Ben Plum and the Tattered Prince to have their men do likewise. She looked up. I trust, Lord Connington, that you will attend to the Golden Company. I will lead them myself, Connington said simply, bowing slightly. Very noble, I'm sure, Naharis said sarcastically, slotting his knife back into its sheath, but the Storacrows, Windblown and Second Sons are warriors. We're here to fight, not deal with fires and unruly peasants. Your role, Daenerys said, allowing her voice to become cold and commanding, is to fight my enemies wherever they may be. Right now that means fighting the fire that threatens to devastate the capital. Do as I command, unless you're not man enough for the task. Daario's eyes glittered dangerously. For a moment Dany thought he might strike her, but then the moment passed. The handsome sellsword smiled, showing his golden tooth. If that is what the lovely queen commands, I will see it carried out. It is. Dany confirmed. Gods help me. She saw Aegon glower at the sellsword. There is no love lost between those two. They talked for another hour on the disposition of their forces and how they would fight the fire. Dany was aghast that her council had plans to demolish entire rows of houses and business in order to create a ring-shaped void around the fire. Deprived of materials, it was hoped that the fire would burn out and prevent the devastation from spreading further. Unfortunately, the ring of devastation, as shown on the map, was huge, a blot on the city that would take months, if not years, to rebuild. It is really necessary to destroy so many? The queen asked, the color draining from her face as the full scope of the plans was made clear to her. I'm afraid so, Khaleesi, Jorah replied, his face grim. Our efforts to fight the blaze are not doing enough to prevent it spreading. At best we are merely slowing it down. We need to create a buffer zone, allow the fire to burn itself out. And it must be wide enough so that the fire can't be spread across the gulf by the wind, Connington added. But you tell me that the fire has only come so far. Dany pointed to a line on the map. Why are you then proposing to start demolition so far away? She pointed to another line that was deeper into the untouched parts of the city. We need time to create the barrier, Connington advised her. Otherwise, the fire will have got past the gap before it is finished. But that will mean surrendering over a third of the entire city, Dany said, appalled. You are essentially losing everything from Cobbler's Square to the Street of Steel. It is grave necessity, Your Grace, Connington noted, but a necessity all the same. Dany looked down for a moment, taking in the proposal. She glanced over at Egon, who had moved to stand alongside her. Her betrothed's face was hard, but his eyes were sad. He too was looking over the plans before he glanced up and nodded briskly. He doesn't want to do this any more than I do, but we have no choice. There is another option, Your Grace, a voice sounded from the door. Ask Robb Stark for aid. Dany's head snapped up as she watched Lord Varys enter the chamber. The man's robes were immaculate, though his face looked drawn, fatigued from the long hours of work and no rest. What? Egon sitting back into his chair. Forgive me, Your Grace, Varys gave a simpering bow, but it seems that if manpower is an issue, then we have the entire Stark host barely 2 leagues from the city. They can call upon thousands of men to help us. Manpower is not the issue, Mormont argued. We have thousands of men, the only issue we have is how best to use them. What I propose has 2 benefits, Your Grace, Varys said, ignoring the looks of indignation coming from some of those in the room. Not only do we get material aid, but it also demonstrates to the Starks that we are doing our uttermost to deal with the situation. The eunuch looked pensive. Already my little birds tell me that the young wolf is horrified and outraged by what is happening here. We need to open up the city, and ask for help. It demonstrates an intent of action and purity of purpose. Or it demonstrates that we're vulnerable. Egon fired back as he shook his head. You would have us invite an enemy force into the city? Varys turned his small eyes onto the king. The Starks are not our enemies, Your Grace. They have no desire for conquest. If we ask for a promise of good conduct, then they will have to leave when this crisis is averted. Robb Stark will honor his word. He is too much like his father. We cannot risk the safety of the city based on how the young wolf is similar to Lord Eddard. Egon snarled angrily. The city is already at risk, Varys pointed out, looking over the map on the table. There is a real danger that the fire will sunder your plans and burn down the capital. Even if we do bring it under control, I fear that the people are beyond our reach in any case. The rumor is... Wait one moment, Connington interceded. I'm sure the rumors are quite engaging, but we have no time for this. The hand looked at Daario and Jorah Mormont and then at Sir Laswell Peake, second in command of the Golden Company. You have your instructions, gentlemen. Go and carry them out. Jorah and Sir Laswell bowed at the king and queen before leaving quickly. Daario languidly looked at Dany, giving her a grin and mock bow before he casually made to walk from the room. Halfway between the table and the door, a voice rang out. You impress upon your men the need to act with decorum. Egon threw at Daario. As Sir Jorah and Lord Varys say, we already have problems with the people. I suspect the Queen would be most unhappy if your sellswords exacerbated the problem by seeing this order as an opportunity to steal rather than a chance to show your usefulness. Dany's betrothed looked towards her expectantly. She nodded firmly at Daario, who gave another of his winning smiles as he stepped silently through the door. The sellswords will cause us nothing but trouble. Jorah said wistfully, the people are already on edge. Oh, we are way past that, Sir Jorah Varys spoke out, with none of his usual soft tone. We could be looking at an open revolt. The rumors I spoke of before center on the idea that the Targaryens are directly responsible for the blaze. What? Dany gasped. That's absurd. Egon chimed in, looking furious. I appreciate your Grace's feelings on the matter, Varys said solemnly, but that doesn't change the facts. Rumors have spread throughout the city that you destroyed the September and are responsible for the city being ablaze. How were we supposed to have done that? Egon asked. Using your dragons, of course, Varys said slowly, as if talking to a child. Several eyewitnesses have reported seeing a dragon fly past the Great September just before the explosion. That's a baseless lie. Egon stormed, looking about the room for confirmation. Neither Daenerys nor I have been flying in days, and Drogon and Viserion are nor loosed so close to the city without us being there to control them. A dark shadow crossed the king's face. As for the third, Rorigal has refused to cooperate with any instruction for almost 2 weeks. Even the horn cannot seem to rouse him to activity. He just ambles around and eats. No, if any of the dragons had left the Godswood, we would have been told. Dany nodded in agreement. Neither of them had had the time to go flying for some time. The affairs of the city kept them more than occupied. There is just not enough time in the day. Besides, Egon went on, the initial explosion was green. Everyone says so. The dragon all blow yellow flame. Clearly this was the work of wildfire. Wisdom Hallin has stated as much. though why the holy cretins sat there and watched it being brought in beneath them is beyond belief. I concur with both your grace and wisdom, Hallin Varys stated, folding his arms into his robes. I too believe that the explosion was the result of someone triggering a wildfire cache underneath the September. As for smuggling the substance in, I would hypothesize that such an effort was unnecessary. The cache was probably left over from when your grandfather, King Aerys, decided to burn the city rather than relinquish it to his foes at the end of the rebellion. My spies tell me that he littered the city with copious amounts of wildfire which he could ignite at will should the rebels look to be on the verge of triumph. There was a moment of silence. Dany could have cried then. My own father, a monster who would have preferred causing hundreds of innocents to be burned alive than to surrender the city to the usurper. What kind of man does that? What kind of bloodline do I come from? That just compounds the faith's stupidity. Why didn't the holy men remove the damn wildfire from underneath their feet? Aegon blurted, if what you say is true, Lord Varys, then the substance has been sitting there for almost 20 years. Why in seven hells did they allow it to remain? It's possible that they did not know it was there. Varys noted grimly. As I say, your grandfather had wildfire caches planted throughout the city. Several have been found in the time since the rebellion. The Alchemist Guild offered the uncovered material to Tyrion Lannister for use in defense of the city against Stannis Baratheon. Hold. Dany said, raising one hand. She could feel the blood drain from her face. Are you telling me that there may be more of these caches around the city? I cannot be sure, your grace, Varys said, inclining his head. Regrettably, all the people who were involved in King Aerys' plan are long since dead. The Queen turned to Connington. I want this city searched, she ordered firmly. The whole city. Every cellar, every loft space, every possible hiding place. This cannot be allowed to happen again. When the Hand blanched visibly and opened his mouth to protest, Dany reassured him, you may wait until the current crisis is over, my lord, but make sure the search is carried out. It will be done, your grace, Connington grumbled. Satisfied, Dany returned to the Master of Whisperers. Now, how can we convince the small folk that we had nothing to do with this calamity? The eunuch took a deep breath. Fighting the fires with the zeal you've demonstrated is a good start, but it is not enough. True, the bulk of the faith has been destroyed, but a few septons still survive. They have been preaching to the small folk that your graces have acted to silence the high septon who dared to check your rule. After all, what could be a better sign of your supremacy than to wipe the faith away in a deluge of fire? He has a point there. It would have been an impressive display. Only we had nothing to do with it. Aegon stormed. True, the old man was a fool and a constant irritant, but are the people so stupid as to believe we'd bring such devastation down on ourselves? Varys looked unmoved by the young king's anger. The common notion is that you had no idea what you were unleashing. That in your haste to destroy the faith you lost control of the fire. All this, Varys indicated out the window towards the city, is a result of your own folly. Wonderful, so we're not only murderers, consumed with Targaryen madness, but we're also incompetent into the bargain. A ruler can be, at times, mad or cruel, but very rarely can you be both and survive for long. Just ask my father. In some quarters, Varys reported sadly, you are both compared to Maegor the Cruel and the Mad King. It alternates depending on the telling. Gods! What are you doing to deter these rumors? Aegon demanded. All our efforts to quench the fires and save the city will be for naught if we subsequently lose the place to the small folk. I am doing my best. Varys said calmly, though with the city watch and the army now involved in dealing with the fire and deterring looters, I am hard-pressed to deal with the troublemakers. I can hardly have them arrested when I have no men at arms with which to do it. Perhaps Ser Jorah can spare a few men, Dany supposed evenly before adding, though I am confused. We know the small folk have it wrong, that it was wildfire and not dragons that did this. Have you managed to ascertain why the cache was detonated and who might be responsible? The Master of Whisperers looked deeply unhappy. I regret, your grace, that I have been unable to identify the culprits behind the attack. You're the god's damned spy master. Aegon exclaimed, you're supposed to know these things. Varys gave the king a puzzled look. And from where would you suggest I start my investigation? What evidence there is was either destroyed in the explosion or is covered by the smoking ruins of the September, surrounded by a ring of fire that we are struggling to control. We have already established that it is unlikely that the perpetrators would have needed to smuggle the wildfire under the September, that they merely uncovered and then used what was already there. That, in fact, has been there for decades. Recent witnesses will be useless. As, so it seems, are you. Egon hurled angrily. You may dismiss me if you wish, your grace, Varys said calmly. I serve at the pleasure of the throne. That will not be necessary, Connington interjected firmly. Of course no investigation can be conducted of the site itself at the moment. I believe we would be better served by having you look into the rest of the city. See what avenues of interest can be identified. That is already underway, my lord Hand, Varys assured him. Good, Dany declared, because we need to know who was responsible and whether any other attacks are planned. Varys bowed over his folded hands, acknowledging her order silently, though his face was tight with determination. We must bring the small folk to heel as soon as possible, Egon spoke up once more. We cannot fight the blaze if we have to deal with fighting the populace. We should have the gold cloaks corral the people into safe areas and hold them there until we have extinguished the fire. That is easier said than done, Connington answered, despite looking deeply concerned. However, I shall discuss the matter with Ser Jorah. We must prioritize the fire though. We would be well advised to deal with one crisis at a time. Varys sighed. If only we had that luxury, my lord. Reports from the Stormlands indicate that the Unsullied are encountering problems with pacifying the local small folk. The commander, Mossador, calls for further reinforcements to be sent. Ah yes, Missandei's brother. He is a proud man, it must hurt him to call for aid. The queen felt a headache build just behind her forehead. A reaction to the amount of pressure they were under. Her mind spun from the rapid changes in conversation. Hell's teeth! Egon cried, is there to be no end to the problems we must face? It would appear not, Varys said patiently, the trials of ruling a realm are boundless. Which is why I again advise your graces to bring the Starks into the fold. Ask them to assist with fighting the fire and then, when the situation has been resolved, quickly ask them to sign the alliance treaty. Resolve that outstanding issue now. Dany paused. The idea had a degree of merit to it. Right now a great deal of focus was being centered on the Crown lands to counter any possible excursions by the Starks, a failsafe in case the negotiations turned sour. If we could sign the treaty, then the Starks will be bound by their word and it would free up the army to resolve issues across our territory. If Mossador had felt the need to ask for assistance, then he must truly be encountering problems in the south. We cannot have Robb Stark's army in the capital, Egon responded defiantly. While his troops would be welcome, we simply cannot allow armed men whose loyalty is uncertain to walk our streets. For all we know, the Starks could use the opportunity to stir up even more discontent and revolt. The Starks have so far acted with honor. Connington pointed out, I see no reason to doubt them. Are you willing to risk everything we've achieved on that? Egon asked boldly. A quick glance told Daenerys that the thought had struck home with the Lord of Griffin's Roost. The Hand was looking contemplatively out of the window. Sensing that he was losing the argument, Varys tried another tact. We could ask for the Stark assistance to be limited to countering the fire and relocation of the small folk. They needn't be heavily armored or armed. You think the Starks will agree to that? Connington cut in. I wouldn't. Egon snapped from his chair. In any event, it would be a huge sign of weakness to call for aid from the Starks. Why would they ally with us when we cannot even control our own capital? Would you ally with a house who couldn't do that? I wouldn't. Nor would I. Varys looked over the room, seemingly gauging their reaction to the king's words. However, the eunuch was not quite as timid as his soft exterior portrayed. I believe our focus should be on helping the people of this city, your grace. Varys tilted his head. That can best be accomplished by saving the people from the fire and then signing a treaty whereby the entire nation can be united and at peace. There was silence round the table. Dany's headache was fast becoming worse. It is too much. There are too many factors at play and all demand our attention. Lord Connington walked to the table. He looked weary but alert all the same. We will consider the treaty in due course. For the moment I have hope that the fire can be resolved using the tactics the small council has devised. Varys gave an exasperated sigh and then nodded as if in agreement. As you say, my Lord Hand. He suddenly brightened. I can however report that, with the exception of a few surviving septons, the faith does indeed appear to have been destroyed in the explosion of the Great September. You think this is a good thing? Dany accused him sharply. Not at all, your grace, Varys responded, but it cannot be denied that the High Septon is dead, along with a great numbers of his followers, including the bulk of the so-called faith militant. While I deplore the destruction, it cannot be denied that the faith is no longer a force that can be arrayed against us. That, at least, is a boon. Connington stated darkly, though there was no joy in his voice at the defeat of an enemy. Would that it had occurred without the loss of so much innocent life. Here. Dany surveyed the table. The council looked tired, weary of the burdens they had to continue to bear. Our reign is less than 3 months old. If they are exhausted now, how bad will it be in the years to come? She walked down the wide corridor, not paying attention to those around her. The Queen's mind was elsewhere as she made her way through the Red Keep. Who could be responsible for all this? Who would have motive to destroy the September, destroy the faith? Logic told her that there was a logical answer. The Starks. The thought galled Dany, but she could not deny that the logic behind her suspicion made sense. In one move Robert Baratheon's bloodline had been severed, the former Queen Regent was killed and the faith, no friends to House Stark, had been decapitated. A more surgical strike would be hard to envisage. But if they are false, and Mokoro is right about the threat in the north, what does that say for the future? Your Grace. She glanced over her shoulder. A short distance behind, but keeping pace with her was Illyrio Mopethys. The fat man was fast for his size, though sweat dripped from his forehead. The small drops of perspiration flowed past his nose and down his fleshy cheeks. As always, his beard was oiled into 2 blonde forks. Behind them both walked Sir Barristan Selmy, the man her constant shadow. She had rebelled against his desire to escort her around the Red Keep, but the man was stubborn to the point of insanity. Try as she might, he would not leave her alone. He too believes that there is something foul afoot. Apologies, Magister, my mind was elsewhere. On the plight of the city, no doubt. Dany looked over the fat man, trying to hide her disgust. I noticed you weren't in council earlier. Neither were Marwyn or Mokoro. The 2 unlikely friends had been seen together a great deal recently. The pair, one tall, thin and black, while the other squat, fat and fleshy, made for an almost comical duo. Your presence was requested. I fear I know little of fighting fires, your grace. Mopethys noted sadly. Maybe not, Dany said reproachfully, but the council cannot always discuss money matters. She heard the man make a wry snort, though it could just as easily have been a wheeze. I would be grateful if the council considered the realm's finances at any session. Dany stopped in her tracks and confronted the man. You have a complaint? Indeed I do, your grace. The Magister did not seem deterred by her look of anger. It has been some time now since the realm's finances were the topic of conversation of the council. While I fully appreciate that there are issues that appear more urgent, I can also assure you that certain matters of finance should not be overlooked. Perhaps you haven't noticed, Dany waved a hand out of a window, the city is aflame. Hundreds, if not thousands, of lives are threatened. Are you really saying their concerns are less than the issue of how much gold we have in the treasury? What is occurring in the city is a great tragedy, your grace, the Magister stated flatly, showing no emotion, but that does not detract from the issue of the Iron Throne's colossal debt. Dany casually reached up to massage her forehead. Here we are, on the verge of losing the city, and this fool would have me counting coppers. Surely this can wait. With regret, your grace, I disagree, Mopethys argued, showing not the merest hint of regret in his tone. The finances of the crown are paramount. Already we have dangerous parties at our doors, all clamoring for payment of our massive debt. I thought you were taking steps to resolve that troublesome issue. Indeed I was. Illyrio's eyes glittered. For example, I can now report that the debt we owe House Tyrell of Highgarden has been stayed indefinitely. I met with my counterpart in Robb Stark's council, and he has said that there is no need to be troubled by the debt. Indeed, upon the marriage of the heirs of House Targaryen and Stark, it is likely to be forgiven in its entirety with no repayments made. Dany looked bemused. Quite an accomplishment, Magister, but I believe the council agreed that we would also approach the Starks for support in paying the Iron Bank, who, I believe, are our biggest creditors. One step at a time, your grace. Magister Illyrio replied smoothly with a wry chuckle. I am due to meet Lord Willers Tyrell later this week to discuss that very matter. And what of the other debts? Well, the Magister shifted uncomfortably. The only other parties to whom the crown owe money are the Faith and the Lannisters. He gave a slight smile. After yesterday it would appear that the Faith will not be in a position to collect on that debt. I find your confidence misplaced, Magister Dany shot back. It would appear likely that the new High Septon, whomever he is and whenever he's appointed, will want the funds in order to help rebuild the Faith. Doubtless he will, your grace. Mopethys gave a wicked grin, but such a debt will not be called in for some time and will require the Faith to provide proof of the amount owed. Evidence of which may be hard to come by. Dany felt a cold shiver down her back. This one cares for nothing but money. People, honor or justice be damned. And what of the Lannisters? Well, Mopethys said gregariously, if what Lord Varys tells us is true, then the last of the Baratheon children lies dead. As is her mother. House Lannister would seem to hardly be in a position to ask for their money. The girl Myrcella, burned alive. Poor child. Whatever grievances I had with her father, whichever one that was, the girl did not deserve such a fate. I had no quarrel with her. Cersei may be dead, but she had a brother. Dany reminded him. Lord Tyrion. Yes, Mopethys agreed. However, he is currently a prisoner and not likely to be released. Besides, I was given to understand that Prince Doran was looking for methods to have the little beast executed. Perhaps, Dany allowed, though Varys and Lord Connington have submitted that we might use the man to gain control of the Westerlands. That is unlikely, your grace, Mopethys said dismissively. While I don't doubt that my noble friends have the belief that they can use the imp to make a case for lordship of the region, I would suppose it is highly implausible that Robb Stark will honor any such claim. The Westerlands is a conquered region. Its lands, and wealth, now belong to the Starks. I seem to remember you telling me, Magister, that the Westerlands and the Reach are by far the richest regions of the realm. How do you propose to pay off the Iron Bank if these areas are controlled by the Starks and they refuse to help shoulder the burden of the debts? They have not refused yet, your grace. Illyrio's smile faltered slightly. I am hopeful that I can negotiate an honorable settlement with them later this week. He talks of an honorable settlement when in reality he is just asking for money. Like a beggar on the streets with a wooden bowl imploring passers-by for whatever loose coins they might have about their person. Hopefully the birth of the new Stark heir will incline them towards generosity. Illyrio's smile widened, though Dany could see the slyness behind it. This man may be all bulbous red flesh, full of japes and off-color humor, but he is as sharp and wicked as a dragon's claw. I hope for all our sakes that you're right, Magister. Without control of the Reach and Westerlands we are in a sorry state. Dany glanced out a window towards the cityscape, a situation that can only be worsened by this fire. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the destruction caused here will disrupt trade and income for the foreseeable future. Illyrio's smile vanished as quickly as ice dropped in hot water. That is highly regrettable, your grace. Trade, and the tax revenue it creates, will be crucial in order to recover the realm's finances. I am aware, Dany said curtly, but rebuilding can only commence when the fire is put out. She gestured to the window, and we have not yet done so. But when we have, the damage can be repaired, Illyrio noted in an almost pleading tone. Ser Jorah tells me that repairs on the eastern wall have been proceeding apace. Indeed, though Ser Jorah has also reported to me that you continue to berate him for the cost. I see it as my role, your grace. The man bowed his head. As unpleasant as people find it, you and the king have charged me with ensuring that the realm's coffers are kept supplied. I would not be fulfilling my obligations if I did not ensure that your grace's endeavors did not deliver value for money. Nonsense, you just hate parting with money. You do nothing at all if there is no gain in it for you. Even offering Viserys and myself refuge in Pentos was a calculated move, assessed against the potential risk versus reward. Had we been too much of a liability we would have been out on the streets with all the other vagabonds and wastrels. And you are most diligent in your duties, Magister, Dany offered. The king and I are most grateful for your efforts. However, even you must be aware that the cost of rebuilding after this latest disaster is likely to be extremely high. Illyrio mumbled unhappily but offered nothing further. Dany merely nodded before she walked away. At least, if nothing else, the tragedy here has wiped that smile from that man's face. She approached the heavy wooden door with a sense of trepidation. The guards on either side of the entrance stood rigidly at attention, their eyes fixed on the corridor ahead of them. The bronze-clad figures stood wearing leather armor with a sun and spear motif emblazoned on their clothes. She glanced at both of them in expectation, but they did not acknowledge her arrival. "Announce the queen," Sir Barristan said as he stepped up behind her. The two sentinels remained silent, undeterred from their vigil. "Announce her," Selmy said, raising his voice. "This is your queen. You will not ignore her." "I must apologize for their silence," a deep rumbling voice uttered from the corridor to the side of them. "They have been ordered to admit no one." Dany swung her head to see a tall Bravo Sea warrior standing to one side. The man was tall, broad-shouldered and bore a long axe strapped to his back. The man looked taciturn as he inclined his head slightly. "Your Grace, I am Ario Hotter, captain of Prince Doran's guard. We have orders that the prince is not to be disturbed." "But this is the Queen," Barristan Selmy reproached him. "Surely your orders did not extend to her." "My master's orders did not specify an exemption," Ario Hotter claimed. "You, more than most, know the value of following orders, Sir Barristan. Even so, I regret that I cannot allow you to pass." Hotter rumbled ominously. "I must ask you to leave now, your Grace." "Ask you both?" "This is the Red Keep, sir," Sir Barristan argued angrily, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. "You may not tell the Queen where to go, especially in her own house." "I do not serve the Queen, Lord Commander. I serve the Prince of Dawn, and he has ordered me not to permit entry." "You do not command here," Sir Selmy stated as he stepped forward and drew his sword. Dark Sister gleamed in the torchlight. The Valyrian steel looked as threatening as ever. The two guards on either side of the door suddenly hefted their spears and set their shields in front of them. "I do not wish to fight you, Sir Barristan," Hotter said warningly. "I have nothing but respect for you. But I have my orders, and I will obey them." Well, at least the tone was respectful. "Still, I must put an end to this before it gets any more out of hand." She stepped forward. "You say that you are forbidden to allow entry to anyone?" "That is correct, your Grace," Hotter nodded. "Surely, Prince Doran did not issue such an instruction with the expectation that I would visit his chambers." Dany kept her tone light, reasonable. "No use making more of an issue of this than there has to be. Might I request that you simply ask if he will see me? I am certain he will make an exemption for his order in my case." She raised a hand as Ario Hotter started to mouth a protest. "If Prince Doran is truly indisposed, I will withdraw and speak to him another time." Hotter looked doubtful for a moment but then nodded absently. He waved a hand to the two guards before stepping to the heavy wooden door and rapping his gloved knuckles on the surface. A command was heard from within the room and, respectfully, Hotter stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Dany almost laughed. "I am supposed to be Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, yet I cannot even enter a room in my own castle. Truly the gods use us for their own cosmic jests. This is outrageous, your Grace," Selmy muttered, his face dark with anger. "Stay your hand, Sir Barristan," Dany ordered him. "I dare say that this is an oversight. I gave the prince no indication I would visit him, so we can hardly object to him being unprepared. Even so, your Grace, the rudeness that the man—" "He was blunt, not rude." Dany turned as the door opened. Ario Hotter had returned. "The prince apologizes, your Grace, and says he would be honored if you would visit him." Hotter looked past her to Barristan. "Just you, however." "I would be happy to accept such a gracious invitation," Dany replied smilingly. She turned to her protector. "Wait here. I shall not be long." She stepped over the threshold, following Ario. Inside the room, Dany was stunned. The chamber was decorated with fine red and gold drapes that had been attached to the ceiling in such a way that allowed the thin material to drop all the way to the floor. The whole room looked like the inside of a giant marquee. Thick carpets covered the floor. The heavy wooden furniture had been removed and, in its place, there were comfortable thick cushions that were piled in high heaps that would allow a person to recline in absolute comfort. "This way, your Grace," Ario told her, leading the way through the maze of drapes and cushions. Dany picked her way across the room. It was a welcoming place, kind and warm. Dany felt at peace in the chamber more so than at any other room in the Red Keep. She was led to a small open area that had a ring of cushions in the center. Evidently the location of many meetings and discussions. Now, though there were only 3 people in the area, two so tightly close together that they might have been one person. The dim light of the room prevented Dany from identifying them. "Your Grace," Doran's voice came up to her from across the room. The middle-aged man was sat on a high-backed set of cushions at the far end of the open space. "I apologize for any problems you encountered getting entry. Aereo is most zealous in carrying out my orders." "No apologies necessary," Dany said as she looked reassuringly at the large warrior at her side. "Would that all our servants were so studious." "I thank you, Your Grace. Your understanding is appreciated." Doran turned to his captain. "You may leave us, Aereo. I will call you if needed." As the man walked back the way he had come, the sound of his heavy footfall swallowed up by the heavy carpets that littered the floor. Dany clasped her hands in front of her. "I thought I might find you alone." "Regrettably, Your Grace, in Dawn we take family obligations incredibly seriously. I was just trying to offer comfort to my brother." She started. Now she was a little closer. She could clearly see the outline of Doran's sibling. The man was hunched on a couch, his shoulders shaking as he was nestled into the chest of a Dornish woman. "I shouldn't be here. I'm an uninvited guest, an interloper into their grief." "Gods, the man has just lost his daughters. Forgive me, Prince Oberyn, I did not recognize you, or your companion." "The lady in question is Ellaria Sand," Doran said as he stood on shaky legs. The long bronze robe the prince wore swung into place as he walked towards Dany with uncertain steps. It seemed to her, even in this reduced light, that every step caused the man agony. "She is my brother's paramour and the mother of 4 of his children." "Not the ones who—" "No, Your Grace," Doran said sharply. "Thankfully not. Ellaria's children were far too young to have accompanied us on our trip from Dawn, though it was a hard choice to leave Elia, who is of age. They all remain safely in Sunspear under the protection of my son Quentyn." "So then who?" The other 4. Ellaria Sand looked up fiercely, her arms draped comfortingly across her paramour's shoulders. "Oberyn tells me that Obera, Nym, Tyen and Sarala were all in the Great September." Dany glanced in anguish at the Red Viper's shaking shoulders. "I do not understand, Prince Doran," she whispered, though she knew Oberyn could probably hear her. "I thought that your brother was just taking 2 of his daughters as an escort for the girl Myrcella." "Indeed he did," Doran said, looking sympathetically. "However, Tyen had already infiltrated the September in advance of the funeral. She was masquerading as a Septa to win the trust of the High Septon." "I remember. The unexpected presence was Sarala," Doran noted quietly. "She was not expected to be there." "Not at all. The Tyrell bastard got her killed," Ellaria said venomously, her eyes wet, her cheeks tear-stained. "Had he not brought her to the September she would not have—" The woman eyed her lover as he sat looking at the floor. "Not have perished," Doran said as gently as he could. The Prince of Dawn put a hand out and gripped his brother's shoulder in solidarity. Oberyn's own fingers reached up and took hold of the supporting hand, returning the gesture. "This is interesting. Forgive me, Prince Doran, I'm puzzled. Why does the Lady Ellaria believe that the Tyrells had anything to do with what happened at the September?" Doran gestured to one of the cushions. He waited for Dany to sit before he took a place on a nearby cushion, expertly balancing his thin frame in a dignified way on the soft surface. He was almost shoulder to shoulder with his brother, but the contrast was a marked one. Doran's younger brother was certainly more of a warrior than the older man could ever hope to be. "In truth, Your Grace, Sarala was not supposed to be present at the September." Prince Doran looked sadly at his brother. "The last word we had was that she was in Old Town, potentially seeking knowledge at the Citadel." Dany wanted to ask how it was that the girl was attempting to do that. The Maesters do not allow women into the Citadel, but she held her peace. Now is not the time for idle thoughts. "It would appear," Doran went on, "that Sarala was found by Willers Tyrell and brought with him to King's Landing. She came with him to the September. And was left to die there." Ellaria spat hatefully. "Left to die in a torrent of flame?" "No." The sound was so soft that the Queen was not sure that Prince Oberyn had spoken. "Willers brought her to the September so that he could save her life, not end it." The room was still. "Explain, Oberyn," Doran ordered, looking intently at his brother. The Red Viper raised his head. It was a tormented, angry face, creased with failure and loss. "Sarala wrote to me some time ago. She was in Old Town studying at the Citadel. one of her many such excursions to sate her curiosity. She had disguised herself as a boy and assumed the role of a novice called Alras, one of her numerous aliases. Clever strategy. Disguise yourself as a boy and enter a place only men can enter. Unbeknownst to me, Oberyn went on, Sarala happened to come across Willers Tyrell when he visited Old Town in order to ensure the defenses against the Ironborn were in place. He took one look at her and co-opted her into his service, bringing her back to Highgarden and then on to King's Landing. Oberyn's voice was filled with pain. I had no idea she was even in the September until I saw her behind Willers when we were all before the High Septon. Though she, of course, gave no sign that she recognized us. He brought her there to kill her. Ellaria repeated heatedly, he must have planned to spring his vile trap as soon as he was safely away. No, you don't understand. Oberyn shook his head, he could have killed her at any time. Sarala found us as we waited for Myrcella to finish her audience with the High Septon. Willers had dismissed her and ordered her to return to her father. He knew Sarala's identity. Doran asked sharply. Yes. Oberyn answered simply, apparently he had always known. From the moment he saw her. I can't fathom how. It was the eyes. A girl's voice sounded from across the room. The group on the couch looked round. Tyen. Oberyn's voice broke with relief as he threw himself upright and surged across the room. In an instant the girl was in her father's arms. She was weeping uncontrollably, her head buried into his shoulder. She must have climbed, thought the window. Doran muttered, glancing to a balcony at the far end of the chamber. They should have named them sandcats rather than snakes, though it's hardly as fear-inspiring. Ellaria had gone over to her lover, who was hugging his daughter fiercely to him, the girl's blonde hair wrapped around her father's strong arms as he pulled her close. For a long moment the three hugged each other before Oberyn pulled back to take in his daughter. How are you here? How did you survive? Dany felt uncomfortable. This was decidedly a family occasion and she was intruding. Even so, she too wanted answers that only the girl could provide. I owe my life to Willers Tyrell, Tyen Sand said as she gratefully took a goblet of wine that was handed to her by her uncle, who was smiling benevolently at her. He got me out. How? Why? Like Sarala, he knew who I was. Tyen answered, in between gulps of wine. He introduced himself at the end of Tommen Baratheon's funeral service and asked to speak to the High Septon. I was shocked to see Sarala pretending to work with Mace Tyrell's son, but I swear I gave no sign of it. We spoke to the High Septon and the man ordered me to show Tyrell to the library so that he could look through some texts. As we left the central chamber, Willers bade me to wait. He turned to Sarala and dismissed her. Told her he knew who she was and that it was now too dangerous for her to remain with him anymore. He said that while he believed her intentions to be harmless, it was unlikely that his grandmother would feel the same way. The Queen of Thorns had just been made the Stark's Master of Whisperers and she was on the lookout for spies from our side. Willers told Sarala that he had been looking for ways to return her safely and now was a perfect opportunity for her to rejoin the family. He told her to take it. This is exactly what Sarala told me when she found us. Oberyn confirmed. He seemed to be pushing his grief away with force of will. His eyes were clear, contemplative. Your sister joined us when we fought the Septon's men after he refused to release Myrcella. Bastard. Tyens viciously looked ill-placed next to her beautiful countenance. I thought the High Sparrow might try to convince Myrcella to stay, but I was sure he'd try and do it with persuasion rather than force. Clearly he changed his mind, Doran said absently. Your father and sisters fought valiantly in the girl's defense. And died for it. Ellaria cried, her eyes welling with tears. Dany edged closer. Forgive me, Tyen, but how did you escape? The girl looked confusedly at the Queen before resuming her tale. My father was not the only ones fighting. The Dornish troops he had brought with him were also set upon by the Faith. The sounds of combat reached us in the library. Willers Tyrell ordered his sworn shields, a hulking warrior brute that reminded me of Oberyn and a monstrous man with a burned face, to forge us a path out of the September. I wanted none of that, so I slipped away and tried to join up with the rest of you. The girl blinked back her own tears. I didn't get far. The Faith had gone mad. I ran into Unella, one of the High Septon's main lackeys. She screamed and ordered the men to seize me, said she wanted me imprisoned for attempting to seduce the High Septon. Bitch always hated me, from the moment I arrived. Tien's eyes became fierce, they didn't realize who I was. Whose daughter I was. I killed 2 men and ran to try to reach you, but I got attacked by a group of 6 sparrows. I only had a dagger and they barreled me to the floor before I could stop them. She shook her head to dispel the memory. I had no idea what they intended but knew it was nothing good. I fought hard but I couldn't stop them, there was too many of them and they were too strong. Oberyn gripped the girl tightly and she smiled bravely up at him. But then suddenly Lord Tyrell and his 2 henchmen were there. The 2 warriors made short work of the faith. All 6 were dead in the time it takes me to say it. Willers helped me from the floor and told me to come with him. Said it was too dangerous for me to go hacking through the faith militant to try and get out. He said he would see me safely home. Tien looked calmly in the room, her face becoming a mask of composure. He made good on his word. When we broke clear he left with the burnt man and gave instructions for the woman to bring me to the gates of the Red Keep. She looked at Oberyn. I asked him why he was helping me. He said, that aside from it being the right thing to do, that my father was an old friend and he wouldn't stand by and do nothing when a friend's family was threatened. Dany spoke before she could stop herself. But how did he know who you were? How did he identify both you and Sarala? He said something else. Tien said simply, he told me that our eyes are windows to the soul. He said that father's eyes were the first thing he saw when he fell from his horse in the Tony accident and had never forgotten them. Said he would know them anywhere. Of course, Varys once told me that all the children of Oberyn Martell share one thing in common, the color of their eyes. They may vary in height, weight, hair and skin color, but that their eyes were always the same. Willers Tyrell was always the cleverest of Mace Tyrell's sons. Doran observed shrewdly, we were fortunate he decided to extract Tien from danger rather than allow her to press on and potentially encounter the same end her sisters did. Oberyn's eyes flashed in pain but he nodded vaguely. If it was fortune, Ellaria spat, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. You told us that we still don't know who caused the explosion. Might it not have been the Tyrells? If they did, then they are a much better set of mummers than I. Tien replied, we almost died. We got out through a side entrance purely by luck and the skill of the fighters. Had we been but a second longer we'd have been crushed by falling debris. Indeed, Doran said, his eyes working frantically as he thought through the options. Besides, I think if he was behind the fire then it's highly unlikely that Willers Tyrell would cause the explosion himself. That kind of man would have someone do it for him and be safe away where no danger could get him. He would be highly unlikely to want to be present. Well then, who is responsible? Ellaria demanded. Oberyn caught Doran's eyes. The Prince of Dawn nodded grimly. I am not sure, my dear. But, I promise you that when we find out who committed this act, when we uncover the person responsible for robbing this family of 3 of its dearest members and who murdered Myrcella, once we know who they are, I promise you, that there is nowhere in the world that they could run to escape our vengeance. Fire and blood. Dany promised as she watched from the side as the family embraced. Chapter 71, Brian 4. Chapter text. The tent canvas flapped lightly in the breeze. The wind gently flowed through the tent, cooling the packed ranks of people that had gathered at the king's request. She adjusted her weapon, giving the pommel of her sword a reassuring pat. A ridiculous superstition, the Hound said, but Brian found it strangely comforting to know that the tools of her trade were close at hand. A quick glance at the room confirmed there was no immediate threat to the king. Brian knew almost all of the people present by name and was confident that none of them meant harm to her master. This was not surprising, with the birth of his child. Robb Stark was far more receptive to Brian's view on security for the Queen and his new son. Security had been tightened across the camp, with a particular focus on the Sovereign and his family. With that in mind, the Maid of Tarth had had an enclosure built around the royal tent, a rough wooden palisade that encompassed several other tents and structures. The command tent still occupied the center of the camp, but now there were additional levels of protection. Brian was not entirely satisfied with the new precautions, but she had done what she could. The area was teeming with members of the Wolf Guard. Each one handpicked by Brian herself and trusted implicitly. Her men surrounded the tent and the outside enclosure. Visitors were scrutinized and those who could bring in weapons were restricted. Brian was certain that the king's current focus on security was purely the result of him being a father. Lady Caitlin was certainly not surprised when she had been informed of Brian's new protective measures. All new fathers want to protect their children from threats. She had smiled, both real and imagined. Brian was not so sure that the threat was imagined in this instance. Were they in Winterfell or even Riverrun, then she was sure that such measures would be unnecessary. Though the lessons learned at the Twins had shown her that you could never afford to let your guard down, even for an instant. She watched the assembled lords and knights with a practiced eye. The pavilion they were currently in, set up that morning, was a little distance away from the king and queen's own tent. It was full of lords and knights who were gathered before a small raised platform on which a rough wooden chair had been set, the large frame covered in a wolf's pelt that offered little comfort to the king who sat before them all, but certainly conveyed the impression that the king was an active general on campaign. At the forefront of the crowd were the prominent lords of the Stark Kingdom. Brian recognized Yohn Royce standing tall, all hard muscle and knightly bearing. Not far away was Brynden Tully, the current warden of the Riverlands, still hobbling on his bad leg that was taking an age to heal. The man had refused a chair and stood awkwardly using a cane as he shared a jest with Lords Blackwood and Bracken, who were chuckling with their liege lord out of genuine mirth rather than duty. A new, yet familiar arrival to the group was Lord Randil Tarly, recently arrived with an army from the Westerlands. The man looked regal in his plain armor that was form-fitting yet completely without embellishment. He looked calm and efficient as he stood with his other reach lords, standing slightly behind Willers and Garland Tyrell, who were in hushed conversation with one another, occasionally exchanging smiles with people they recognized. Mace Tyrell's oldest son and heir looked none the worse for wear after the recent day's activities. Brian had originally dismissed the man as a pampered cripple who would, were he not a lord's son, be consigned to begging alms from others. She had not relished being asked to escort him on his mission to King's Landing, but Olenna Tyrell had insisted she lead the escort herself. It is what the Queen would want, the old woman had insisted firmly. She has nothing but praise for your abilities. The Queen is most kind. Brian had bowed. Bugger kindness, the famously blunt old woman declared. Don't think I'm flattering you, girl. Willers is about to go about into the dragon's den. Literally. He must have adequate protection. Were she able, Margaery would command you to be by her brother's side. The king had agreed. We can spare you here, Brian, if only for half a day. Robb Stark had cast an eye out of the tent. I'd ask you to take the hound with you. He gets bored walking around the camp. He's like a bear with a sore head. The king paused, though this bear happens to have the unfortunate habit of getting drunk and picking fights with his fellow soldiers. Brian had been reluctant to take the massive warrior. She found it difficult to warm to the man who, for his part, did nothing to endear himself to those around him. The man was in a perpetual bad humor, snarling and cursing those around him, a condition only made worse by his excessive drinking. No, I don't like him at all. Though, she imagined, it would be hard to imagine who better to have by my side in a fight. When the Faith had attacked them in the September, Clegane had thrown himself into action, his sword sweeping from its scabbard and slashing through the Faith militant and the Sparrows with gleeful abandon. She had though him lost in the chaos, but the Hound was a skilled fighter, who protected Willers Tyrell with his own body while smashing through the lines of enemy with determined ferocity. Together, they had easily cut through the Faith and exited the Great September. And not a moment too soon, Brian thought grimly. They had just made it out through the tunnels at one of the lower levels of the September when the place exploded behind them. They had had to race for the open air as the tunnel they were in became home to nothing but fire and collapsing earth. It had been Brian who had grabbed Willers, and the young Septa he had bizarrely taken along with them, and thrown them out of the tunnel as she saw a massive fireball approaching from the tunnel behind. She had acted on instinct, covering her two charges with her own armored form as the fiery wave had surged over them, the searing heat almost cooking them where they lay. When they got back to their feet, Willers had decided to withdraw to the Stark camp as quickly as possible, despite the fact he seemed torn between the need for prudence and the desire to help look for survivors. In the end, prudence won, but, at the same time, he had ordered an escort for the Septa so that she could be safely conveyed to the Red Keep. After a quick glance, Willers had turned to Brian and asked her to take on the task. My lord, Brian had protested, my place is with you. Sandor has lived in the city for years. He would be best placed to escort the lady where she needs to go. Under usual normal circumstances I would agree, Willers had said, but then he gestured to the Hound. But look at the man, Brian, he's horrified to the point of catatonia. This much was true. Sander Clegane had watched the spectacle taking place high up Wisniew's hill with a look of abject horror. The man was in a trance, locked in some memory that mere words could not penetrate. It's most likely due to his scars, Willers whispered quietly. Rumor has it he was burnt in his youth and has carried the wounds all his life. This must be an awful reminder for him. Clegane! Brian shouted at the warrior. She could not draw his attention from the flames. Clegane! The hound stood rooted to the spot. Nothing seemed to exist for him now but the flames that seemed to be surging down the hill towards them. If he can't rouse himself from this state, then he'll be useless in protect the Queen's brother. Desperate, Brian had slapped the man with her gauntlet. The force of the blow jutted the man's head back with awesome force. To his credit though, the hound was not knocked backward, he just jerked slightly from the blow. It had the desired effect. The hound rallied and, at her instruction, made away with Willers towards the city gate, though Brian suspected the man did not look back again for fear of what he might see. For her it took her some hours to navigate the streets of the city that now thronged with panicked small folk, rushing back and forth with no real idea of what was going on, but seeing danger and fearing that something worse was about to happen. Eventually however she arrived at one of the Red Keep's many gates, left her charge there, and made her way home. It had been a hard task to navigate the city streets, but she had persevered and had headed north to the camp. She arrived just after sunset. The king had praised her mightily and thanked her for the safe deliverance of his good brother who, aside from being red-faced from the heat and exertion, was completely unharmed. Yet again, the king offered Sander Clegane a knighthood for his efforts and, once again, the offer was refused. I just want to get drunk, the hound mumbled as he left the king's tent and had not been seen since. Brian suspected that he'd raided the stores and taken enough drink to achieve the oblivion he craved. Well, so be it, he's earned that much at least. When all is said and done, he did his duty, I can ask for no more. Brian watched as the king held court before the assembled highborn. Robb Stark had dispensed with the normal matters that arose from day-to-day living in the camp. Now, as the king sat on a slightly raised chair set at the back of the tent, the lords formed a line and slowly came forward so that they may speak to their ruler one at a time. The king had not wanted to do this. The idea of receiving gifts on behalf of a newborn was ridiculous to Robb's mind. However, both Lady Catelyn and the Grand Maester had convinced him that it was the proper form, though he did not acquiesce without a fight. It's absurd, the king had argued as he held his son to his chest. It's tradition, Your Grace, Lewin had said calmly. Bloody nonsense is what it is. Robb said, hushing the newborn as it stirred in his arms. Even so, Robb. It is expected. Catelyn commented reasonably, especially with the birth of a future king. So here they were, ready to get the business over with. To his credit, Robb showed no sign of his discomfort. At a signal from their ruler, the assembly came to order. The first to approach the king was Yohn Royce. The old lord of Runestone bowed deferentially. His heavy bronze armor, inscribed with ancient runes that were supposed to ward off evil, was only a slight encumbrance as he bent the knee. Your Grace, the lord's booming voice rang out, I wish to congratulate you on the birth of your son and heir. May he have many long years of life ahead of him. I thank you on behalf of myself and my wife, Robb Stark replied with a smile. With the aid of such loyal and capable men as yourself, how can we do anything but succeed? A few of those closest let out a mighty cheer. Royce smiled as he gestured to the side of the tent where a squire was waiting. The young boy came forward with a sheathed sword. The boy, careful not to let the large object brush along the ground, stepped quickly forward. He bowed and then tucked the scabbard into the crook of his arm, offering the weapon, hilt first, to the king. May I present this gift for the new prince on the occasion of his birth, the squire's master intoned. It has been made in the fashion of your father's sword, the ancestral blade of House Stark. Ice. Robb said, interest making him smile. Indeed, Your Grace. Yohn bowed his head. It is my ardent hope that you consider this weapon a mark of the respect and fealty that my family has for your house and your crown. Robb gestured to the squire, who stepped yet closer. Robb gripped the hilt of the thick broadsword and, in one smooth move, he drew the weapon from its scabbard. The cheery wood sheath was well oiled and the blade slid free easily. The king held the blade aloft before holding it in both hands so he could inspect the offering. A noble gift, my lord, Rob noted, looking over the sword. I see what you mean about it being based on the design of ice. How did your man accomplish that? A labor of love and duty, your grace, Lord Royce replied. I commissioned this weapon from the blacksmith of Runestone, who Lord Stark was good enough to show his own weapon to before he left for Harrenhal. Using ice as a model, the man made this weapon for Lord Stark's grandson. The blacksmith, rather grandiosely, has called it the finest sword he has ever made. High praise. Rob stood clear as he rotated the blade in the air firmly. It is finely balanced, a true weapon. He returned the sword to its scabbard. I thank you again on behalf of my son. Lord Royce was quickly replaced with Sir Brynden Tully, who eschewed the assistance of a squire as he hobbled forward. He quickly presented his grandnephew with a beautifully made hunting bow made of the finest wood in the Riverlands. Engraved through the wood were the vines and roses of House Tyrell. However, careful scruting revealed that a number of the flowers on the vine had been substituted with the head of a direwolf and the occasional fish of House Tully. A fish, uncle? Rob asked with a knowing glance. Let the boy know where he came from. The blackfish looked solemn. Let him never forget that it is not just Stark or Tyrell blood that runs through his veins. He is the great-grandson of Hoster Tully, as well as being the grandson of Eddard Stark and Mace Tyrell. He will never forget, Rob said, loudly enough for the whole tent to hear. Nor that he is also the great-grandson of Lord Lytton Hightower as well. At this, Brian could see a number of the Hightower knights nodding affirmatively. At their head Sir Garth Hightower inclined his head, happy that his family's connection to the throne was being so publicly acknowledged. It can be used for war as well as hunting, your grace, Sir Brynden noted, though I pray we are creating a realm where war is naught but a memory. Still, the old knight gestured to the bow. It does no harm to be prepared. Laughing, Rob embraced his great-uncle and the grizzled old knight limped away smiling. Next came Randyll Tarly, who had arrived the day that Brian had left for King's Landing along with Willers Tyrell. The warrior general stepped forward and went to one knee. His bearing was rigid, his back spear straight. He bowed deeply before looking up at the king. Your grace, the man's voice was as hard as his weathered face, I bring you greetings from the Westerlands. And the Iron Islands, Rob declared with a broad smile. He stood from his chair and walked down to the lord from the reach, seizing his shoulders and raising him to his feet. You are to be commended, my lord. Thanks to your efforts, the Westerlands and the Iron Islands are under our control. I did not do it alone, your grace, Lord Tarly said in a humble tone. Without my men and Lord Redwyne's assistance, then victory might have eluded us. Yet elude you it did not, Rob said firmly, still holding the shoulders of Randyll Tarly. You have done sterling work in the West. My thanks, your grace. Randyll Tarly bowed his head. From her vantage point standing behind the king, Brian could see other lords glower and shuffle uneasily, trying to hide their envy. Ordinarily, the idea of favoring one lord so overtly by showing him such praise would be a bone of contention. Even here, amongst supposed friend, the stakes were high. The king has yet to announce either a master of war or a warden of the Westerlands. No doubt there are many here who would covet such positions and titles. Both would likely bring honor and money to any house whom, had bestowed upon it such a role. Yohn Royce had made it clear that he desired the post of Master of War, and numerous lords would relish the prospect of taking control of the gold-rich Westerlands. The king needs to think carefully before he appoints someone. Brian thought she might be less troubled were the queen up to giving advice. As it was, Margaery Tyrell had been bedbound since the birth of her son. The labor had apparently been a traumatic one, and the queen was resting, surrounded by her handmaidens and septa who tended to her every need. While this was concerning to those unfamiliar with childbirth, Grand Maester Lewin had been vocal in his assurance that the queen was doing well. If the gods are watching and merciful, they will bring the queen back to good health quickly. She turned her attention back to the Lord of Hornhill, who was indicating that his own squires should approach the small dais. Two well-muscled lads came forward carrying a chest between them. As the lads settled the chest onto the floor, their lord spoke again. Your grace does me a kindness. Allow me to present a gift for you and your son. A mark of the esteem you and your family are held by the army and navy of the Reach. On cue the squires opened the chest, pulling back the heavy wooden lid with a slight creak of the metallic hinges. Brian found herself, like the rest, edging forward to look into the recesses of the container, eager to see what gift the Lord of Hornhill had plundered from the Westerlands. What would Lord Randyll have captured? A golden chalice, a tapestry? Intrigued, Robb moved closer to examine the gift. At Lord Tarlis' urging, the squires reached into the chest and, in one swift move, had lifted the object within to shoulder height. So effortless did they lift it that Brian could have sworn it was a robe of some sort. It was clearly an item of clothing rather than a tapestry. A shirt, perhaps. A quick look told her she was mistaken, as Brian, along with everyone else, suddenly saw what the item was. Any noise that had permeated the tent was suddenly silenced as the gathering was afforded sight of the gift. It was a suit of black scale armor, the like of which Brian had never seen before and was unlikely to ever see again. The armor was dark, almost as black as night. It was clearly metallic, and yet it looked as flimsy as the thinnest silk. The scales were edged in red gold that gleamed and shimmered as it moved in the breeze. Within the fine metalwork were whorls, glyphs and arcane symbols that had been folded into the steel by a master of the craft. Valyrian steel, your grace, Lord Tarly declared, the only known piece of armor made in such material. Well, the only one known to exist, of course. The air seemed to have gone out of the pavilion. Everyone was staring at the armor as it swayed gently in the breeze. Everyone, almost warriors to a man, was transfixed by the gift that Lord Tarly was so humbly offering the king. Robb Stark, for his part, looked in awe at the armor. He reached forward and ran his fingers across the material. His fingers skirted the grooves and joints as he examined the item. "My lord, this is truly wondrous," the king breathed as he felt the armor. "Wherever did you find such an exquisite piece? Was it held by some lord in the Westerlands?" As he said it, Brian dismissed the notion internally. Lord Tywin Lannister would never have allowed a bannerman of his to have such an item. He would have insisted that it was gifted to House Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock, having let it be known for years that he would pay a heavy price to anyone willing to part with an ancestral piece of Valyrian steel. Maybe that is why we've never heard of it. Any lord in the West would have been loath to part with such a prize, and yet to reveal its existence and ownership would have forfeited to his liege lord. It would have been kept secure, hidden away from the world, lest rumor got out. This piece, Randyll Tarly stated, was found protecting the body of Euron Greyjoy when he was slain during our successful campaign against the Iron Islands. While the madman was killed by arrows, I can promise that not a single one penetrated this armor. If your grace looks closely, you can see that no so much as a dent had been inflicted, though the pirate fought for some time against a host of men. It was only when a volley of arrows struck his face that the lunatic was finally brought down. I had the armor taken from his body and had it cleaned so that it could be presented to your grace. And that's not all, a voice sounded from behind the back of the group. Jostling the people around him, a knight with orange hair and a freckled face came through the crowd to kneel. An identical youth, evidently the knight's twin, quickly followed to kneel beside his brother. "Our father bade us give you this." The crowd of highborn stirred in consternation as the spell, so hypnotic before, was broken by the abrupt interruption by the two siblings. Robb tore his eyes away from the armor to regard the new arrivals. He appeared to be searching the boys' cloaks for sigils. "Forgive me, sirs. Who is your father?" "Lord Paxter Redwyne, your grace," the knight who had burst through the crowd said from his place on the floor. The youth looked aggrieved that the king had not recognized him. "I am Sir Horace Redwyne, and this is my brother, Sir Hobber." "Ah, of course. I have not had the pleasure of meeting the Lord of the Arbor as yet." The king looked between the twins and Lord Tarly, his voice one of apology. "I appreciate your desire to fulfill your father's wish, but I have yet to thank Lord Randyll properly for his gift. Lord Randyll's gift is a direct result of my father's efforts." The second twin spoke angrily, casting a furious look at the Lord of Hornhill, who was looking at them with a bored expression. "It was my father's fleet that caught Euron Greyjoy and slew him." "It was the king's fleet," Randyll Tarly reminded the boy, his face full of derision and scorn, "and the ships crewed by men under my command." Even so, Hobber spoke out, his face red with pique. "It was my father who captained the fleet, and it was by his orders that the Greyjoy king was surrounded and killed." The knight turned his head to look at Randyll Tarly. "Do you deny it?" "I do not," Lord Tarly replied with an air of disinterest. "I have already made it clear that my army would not have had the victory on the Iron Islands without the aid of Lord Redwyne. Indeed, it was because of his efforts that I permitted your father to take away the weapon you have in your hands." Almost as one, the crowd turned to look at the sword that was clutched in the hands of Sir Horace Redwyne. The youth shook his head in anger before twisting to offer the sword up to Robb Stark. Your Grace, in this my lord Tarly speaks truly. My brother and I were ordered by our father to present this gift to you upon the birth of your son. Robb Stark looked with interest as his fingers traced the pommel of the sword being offered to him. Brian could see that the pommel was shaped like the head of a golden lion. The king seized the grip and drew the sword. He held the weapon aloft, much as he had earlier when presented with the weapon from Yohn Royce, before bringing it down to look at it closely. This too is made of Valyrian steel, he observed quietly. Sir Hobber gave a wide grin. Upon consultation with the Maestas of the Westerlands, we believe the weapon to be Brytraw, the ancestral great sword of House Lannister. It has been lost since before the conquest. A murmur went up from the assembly. Lords and knights looked in shock at the warriors who had returned from the Westerlands and Iron Islands. Seeing a hitherto unknown suit of armor was wonder enough, but to see a recovered Valyrian sword, a named sword no less, was a momentous day indeed. The king looked in awe between the Redwyne twins and Lord Tarly. The two youths were excited, fidgeting from their place on the floor. Lord Tarly remained standing looking straight ahead, as if on parade. Where in the seven hells did Euron Greyjoy get them? Robb asked wonderingly. We cannot be certain, Lord Randall answered. Any surviving crew of Euron Greyjoy's ship had had their tongues ripped out. They were unable to answer our questions. However, enquiries on the Iron Islands reveal that Euron claimed to have visited Old Valyria on his travels. It is likely he picked up the armor there. The Maestas of the Westerlands say the same of Brytraw, Your Grace. Sir Horace interjected hurriedly, keen not be left out of proceedings. It is said that when King Tommen of the Rock left to seek out Valyria, he took his family's sword with him. Neither him, nor the blade, returned. Valyria. Euron walked on the shores of the ancient freehold. Surely not. But then, the objects in front of us. My lord, good Sirs. Robb sheathed the sword and, cutting of the murmur of conversation that had broken out amongst the other lords, you honor me too highly. I cannot possibly accept such gifts. Your Grace, I insist, Lord Tarly said firmly, you would dishonor us if you refuse our offerings. The two youths nodded energetically, but the king straightened. Nevertheless, I must do so. Robb shook his head. Each is essentially priceless. And there we have the difference between Robb Stark and other kings before him. Many would not have hesitated to take such gifts, offering flowery words while they took the items as their due, considering it nothing more than a show of proper respect that vassals owed to their liege lord. Grand Maester Lewin approached from behind Robb's chair and whispered urgently into the king's ear. The young wolf tilted his head and seemed to be listening intently as the older man spoke quietly. For a long moment there was a pause. The silence was so palpable that Brian imagined a mouse squeaking could have been heard. Robb nodded and smiled grimly at the Maester before turning back to the gifts. Rise, sirs. He commanded the Redwyne youths. Smoothly the knights rose from the floor and came to the side of Lord Tarly. The king looked solemn as he stood before them. He waved away Lewin and then resumed, addressing them. Your houses have done me great honor today, my lords. I shall endeavor to be worthy of it. It would please me greatly if all three of you would join me at my table this evening. We have much to discuss. Brian started as she realized that the Grand Maester had advised the king to keep the gifts. It gave her pause as she thought it through. The aged Maester was not a greedy man. The gift of Valyrian steel would have been interesting to him from an academic interest only. Why then had he clearly urged the king to accept the gifts? Realization came to her quickly as she reasoned it out. It was the fact the gifts were so valuable that the kings had to accept them. Brian imagined that the notion of noble houses taking such items as plunder would not have sat well with the king and the Grand Maester, nor with the other noble houses. There was bound to have been conflict when one house claimed such prizes over the other houses who had fought and bled in equal measure for them. There was no way that vassal houses would be allowed to keep such illustrious items. House Tarly and Redwyne had been able to offset such conflict by offering the armor and sword to the king. Not only would it dampen animosity, but it would also garner the king's goodwill. An advantageous position given that there were appointments to be had in the near future. Meanwhile the three reachmen had bowed in obedience at their king's invitation and had withdrawn into the crowd. The king's squires had taken the armor and sword reverently away, towards the back of the tent where the other gifts would be stored. Brian made a mental note to place a guard on the gifts. She chided herself for not thinking of such measure before. While she doubted any of the king's men would steal them, she had to admit that the presence of such objects presented a tempting target for would-be thieves. Seeing the gifts being taken from his presence, the king nodded determinedly. He settled back down on the makeshift throne, his face fixed determinedly. "We continue, my lords." The feast lasted well into the evening. Robb had ordered an area to be cleared some distance from the royal enclosure and ordered several large tents to be erected outside the palisade so that every one of his principal bannermen from across the north, Riverlands, Reach and Vale could be seated and fed comfortably. There was entertainment as minstrels and dancers took to the floor to the delight of the warriors they performed for. The king had also ordered that the common troops receive an allowance of alcohol and food so that they may partake in the revelry. Across the entire camp, wine and ale flowed in abundance as the men celebrated the successful birth of a son and heir to the crown of winter. Despite the grand feast and excessive drinking, Brian knew that Yohn Royce had made sure that the camp still had a suitable numbers of guards and scouts protecting it. A harsh but necessary duty, she felt, though not without its compensations. The men who had drawn the duty had been rewarded with triple rations of food and wine, not to mention a bonus of gold. At the head table in the feast pavilion, the king was in a good mood, though he seemed distracted. He had eaten sparingly and drunk even less, spending the time talking with Lord Tarley and the Redwine twins who, while it was clear thought very little of each other, were willing to sacrifice their personal discomfort for the honor of being seated on the high table with the king. Robb's nearest and dearest did their part in making the three feel welcome. Garland Tyrell spoke animatedly to Hobber as they relived Tony's stories. Horace had been engaged by Sansa Stark, who was listening wide-eyed to the youth's stories of the campaign in the Westerlands and Iron Islands. She was open-mouthed and was looking at the boy as if he was most interesting person in the world. Faced with the attention of such a beauty, Horace had gone red with pride. Though Brian suspected that the wine had a great deal to do with the color now suffusing the boy's cheeks. For Lord Randall, Robb had deployed his veterans. The Blackfish and Willers Tyrell were deep in conversation with the Lord of Hornhill who, despite his apparent misgivings, had reluctantly been maneuvered into what proved to be a passionate discussion on horseflesh and battle tactics. The king flit in and out of the conversations, offering an observation here or a jest there while talking to his mother who sat on his left hand that night in place of the queen. More than once Brian saw the king listening intently as one of his guests spoke, making them the sole focus of his attention while they were talking. As the evening wore, guests either withdrew from the feast or simply fell asleep where they sat. Eventually Robb decided to take his own leave. He stood from his chair and cast a happy eye over the throng, grinning as he took in the sight of Daisy Mormont arguing good-naturedly with the much larger figure of Yohn Royce. The Lord of Runestone was red-faced as Daisy taunted him, smiling sweetly at the man's bombastic outbursts as she gently jibed him. As they watched, the Vale Lord suddenly drew up and then burst out laughing, smashing the table mightily with his large gauntleted hand. The wooden service trembled and shook its trellis. Brian stepped up behind the king. She was still fully armored, her sword strapped to her hip. "Is everything all right, Your Grace?" The king beamed, though his eyes were tired. "Quite all right, Brian. It has been a good day." He wished the rest of the table good night and, with Brian behind him, walked through the tent opening behind his chair. The two wolf guard on duty by the opening snapped to attention as the king joined them in the crisp evening air. "At ease, boys, at ease," the king chuckled as he gathered his cloak around him. "You're both dismissed, Your Grace," one of the guards asked in confusion as he looked between the king and their commander. "It's all right, lads," Robb assured him. "I am just going back to my tent. Your commander here is all the protection I need." Despite the king's words, the two knights looked at Brian. She nodded briskly and quickly followed the king as he began the short walk to the tent. Without warning, the king stopped moving and turned to look in a completely different direction to the one he had been heading in. Brian needed no help with divining what he was looking at. In the distance was the burning site of King's Landing. The city's outline was framed red and green against the pitch-black sky. It was a harrowing sight and one that had graced the southern skyline for more than 2 days. "The scouts say that almost half the city is ablaze," the king muttered, almost to himself. "We should assist them," Brian urged, remembering her flight from the city through its burning streets and frightened people. "I imagine the situation there is beyond desperate. Do you honestly believe I wouldn't help if I could?" Robb accused her, recrimination in his voice, that I would let people suffer and die simply because the treaty has not been signed. The king kicked angrily at a patch of ground. I have offered to send the army down to help the city, but I have been refused. The king scoffed. They refused my offer of help. What is their pride and fear against the suffering of the people? They'd have me sit idle while the capital of Westeros burns to the ground. As Brian recoiled from his anger, the king offered her a tired sigh. My apologies, Brian. My anger is nothing to do with you. It's guilt talking. I sit here, surrounded by wine and fine food, celebrating while people suffer. The birth of a child is still worth celebrating, Brian said quietly. A guttural cry of humorless mirth burst from the king's lips. And there the gods mock me once again. My wife has delivered me a beautiful and healthy boy. Both Margaery and Rickard are healthy and whole. My father is alive, has recaptured the north and rescued one of my missing brothers.